Welcome to Saga Dream Tales, the place where you can relax, unwind, and drift into calm stories shaped by ancient worlds. Here, every tale moves slowly, carried by soft words and peaceful rhythm, made to ease your mind and guide you into a quiet space. In today's journey, we follow Tyr, the one-handed god of justice, as he walks through the ages of the 9 realms. From the golden halls of Asgard to the quiet renewal of a world reborn. His path is marked by honor, sacrifice, and the weight of difficult choices that echo through time. All you need to do now is sit back, breathe deeply, and let the story unfold at its own slow pace. Close your eyes if you wish, let your body settle into comfort, and allow yourself to be carried away to a time when gods faced impossible decisions, and every choice carried meaning that would last through the ages. The journey begins now. The dawn of Tyr. In the time before time was counted, when the world was young and the stars were still learning their paths across the sky, there lived among the gods a being of great courage and honor. His name was Tyr, and his story begins in the golden halls of Asgard, where the gods made their home above the mortal world. Tyr came into being during the age when the cosmos was still taking shape. His father was Odin, the wise one who would become the Allfather, ruler of gods and men. Some tales speak of his mother as a gentle goddess, whose name was lost to time, while others whisper that he came from the ancient giants themselves, born of the old ways before the gods claimed their power. The truth of his birth remained wrapped in mystery, as many things were in those early days. The young god grew tall and strong in the halls of his father. His hair was the color of wheat fields touched by summer sun, and his eyes held the grey-blue depths of winter skies. Unlike his brother Thor, who would grow to love thunder and storm, or his other kin who sought wisdom or beauty or cunning, Tyr found himself drawn to something else entirely. He felt a pull toward justice, toward fairness, toward the keeping of oaths and the honoring of promises. In his youth, Tyr would wander the golden bridges of Asgard, watching how the gods interacted with one another. He saw how deals were made and broken, how conflicts arose between beings of great power, and how difficult it was to find true fairness when everyone possessed might beyond mortal understanding. These observations planted seeds in his heart that would grow throughout his long existence. The halls where Tyr lived were magnificent beyond description. Walls of gold caught the light of the sun and moon, reflecting brilliance in every direction. The floors were made of silver so pure, it seemed like walking on captured starlight. Tapestries woven by the most skilled hands told stories of creation, of the first giants, of the birth of the 9 worlds that hung upon the great tree Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil itself was a wonder that young Tyr often contemplated. The world tree grew from depths unknown, its roots reaching into realms of ice and fire, of the dead and the dark. Its trunk stretched through the middle world, where humans would one day live, and its branches spread across the heavens, where the gods made their dwelling. Birds nested in its highest limbs, and creatures of old magic lived within its bark and among its leaves. The tree connected all things, and Tyr understood even then that this connection meant responsibility. As Tyr grew from youth into the fullness of his power, he began to take on duties among the gods. He was not like some of his kin who sought glory in battle for the sake of songs and stories. Instead, he involved himself in the settling of disputes, in the creation of laws that would govern divine behavior, in the establishment of order among chaos. The other gods noticed this quality in him. When 2 deities quarreled over territory or honor or any of the 1,000 things that beings of power might about, they began to seek Tyr's judgment. He listened to both sides with equal attention, never favoring the strong over the weak, the beautiful over the plain, the clever over the straightforward. His decisions were marked by a quality that others found unusual and valuable. They were fair. This fairness was not easy to maintain. Tyr felt emotions as deeply as any god. He had friendships and preferences, likes and dislikes. But when called upon to judge, he set these aside. He looked at each situation as if through clear water, seeing what lay beneath the surface, understanding the heart of each matter. This ability made him both respected and sometimes resented, for fair judgment does not always give each party what they desire. The world in those days was different from what it would become. The 9 realms were still settling into their patterns. Midgard, the Middle Earth where humans would live, was being shaped and formed. The dwarves toiled in their underground kingdoms, crafting wonders from metal and stone. The light elves danced in their bright halls, while their dark cousins worked their own magic in the depths. The giants, ancient and powerful, watched from their frost-covered mountains and their fire-filled valleys, remembering when they alone held power in the cosmos. Tyr took interest in all these realms. He traveled the branches of Yggdrasil, visiting each world, learning its ways and its people. In the dwarf halls, he watched master smiths work metal until it sang. They taught him patience, showing how true craftsmanship required time and careful attention to detail. In the elf kingdoms, he observed their long memories and their complex traditions of honor and obligation. Among the humans who were beginning to populate Midgard, he saw something that touched his heart deeply. Humans were weak compared to gods and giants. They lived such brief lives, no longer than a single breath in the long lifetime of a deity. Yet within these short spans, they struggled to build, to love, to create meaning from their days. They formed laws and kept them, not because they were forced to by superior power, but because they chose to live together in peace. Tyr found this choice, made freely by beings with so little time, to be profound. He began to take special interest in humanity's development. When they fought among themselves, confused about justice or right action, Tyr would sometimes send signs or inspiration to their wisest members. He could not solve their problems for them, for gods had laws about interfering too directly in mortal affairs. But he could guide, could suggest, could plant ideas in the minds of those who sought fairness. The people of Midgard began to sense his presence. They built stones in his honor, marking places where oaths could be sworn under his watch. Warriors would call upon him before battle, not asking for victory, but for courage to fight with honor. Those who made agreements invoked his name, asking him to witness their promises. A worship grew around him that was different from that given to other gods. People did not fear Tyr, as they feared Odin's wrath or Thor's storm. They trusted him. This trust would prove to be one of the most important forces in Tyr's story, though he did not know it yet in those early days. He simply continued his work, settling disputes, establishing precedents, building the structures of divine law that would govern godkind for ages to come. His wisdom grew with each decision, each careful weighing of competing claims, each difficult choice between 2 rights or 2 wrongs. Time moved differently for the gods than for mortals. A single day in Asgard might equal years in the worlds below, or sometimes the reverse was true, for time itself was still learning its nature. Through these shifting periods, Tyr matured into his role. He became known as the god of justice, the keeper of oaths, the one who could be trusted above all others to do what was right rather than what was easy or pleasant. His father Odin watched this development with mixed feelings. The Allfather valued many qualities in his children, and in the gods who served him. He appreciated Thor's strength, and Balder's goodness, and Loki's cleverness. But Tyr's rigid adherence to justice sometimes troubled Odin, for the father of gods knew that ruling often required flexibility, cunning, and the ability to see beyond simple right and wrong to what was necessary. Yet Odin also recognized that Tyr's nature was valuable. In a cosmos populated by powerful beings with strong desires and few restraints, someone needed to hold the line of law. Someone needed to be incorruptible, unchangeable in their commitment to fairness. Tyr served this purpose, and though father and son did not always agree, Odin supported his role. The young god continued his education in the ways of justice. He studied the old laws that had been established in the earliest days of the cosmos. Some of these laws came from sources older than the gods themselves, from the primal forces that existed when there was nothing but ice and fire, void, and creation. These ancient rules spoke of balance, of the necessity for order to counter chaos, of the price that must be paid for every action taken. Tyr memorized these laws and made them part of himself. He understood that justice was not simply about punishment or reward. It was about maintaining the delicate balance that allowed all the 9 worlds to exist in their places on Yggdrasil. Too much chaos, and everything would collapse into confusion. Too much order, and all life would freeze into rigid, unchanging patterns. The balance between these extremes required constant attention, constant adjustment, constant care. In his studies, Tyr also learned about fate. The Norns, 3 mysterious beings who dwelt at the base of Yggdrasil by the Well of Fate, wove the destiny of all creatures, gods and mortals alike. Their weaving was intricate beyond understanding, connecting each being to every other, linking cause to effect across time and space. Even the gods were subject to their weaving, though most tried not to think about this too deeply. Tyr contemplated the relationship between fate and justice. If all things were already determined by the Norns' weaving, did choices matter? Was justice meaningful in a world where outcomes were already decided? He spent long hours by the Well of Fate, though the Norns rarely spoke and never explained their work. Through observation and thought, he came to understand that fate and choice existed together, paradoxically intertwined. The path might be woven, but how one walked it remained a matter of character and decision. This understanding would serve him well in the great test that was coming, though he could not see it approaching yet. He continued his work, his learning, his slow growth into the fullness of his divine nature. The gods relied on him more and more. His judgments became legendary for their wisdom and their fairness. Even beings from other realms would sometimes seek his counsel, traveling the dangerous paths of Yggdrasil to reach Asgard and ask for his intervention in their disputes. Through all of this, Tyr remained humble. He did not seek glory or fame. He did not ask for praise or reward. He simply did what he believed was right, day after day, century after century. His reputation grew not because he cultivated it, but because his actions spoke for themselves. In a world of gods who often acted on passion, or whim, or personal desire, Tyr stood as something different. He was reliable, trustworthy, just. The golden halls of Asgard rang with many sounds in those days. There were feasts and celebrations, contests of strength and skill, music and laughter, and the joy of beings who possessed great power and few limitations. Tyr attended these gatherings, for he was not a remote or distant god. He enjoyed the company of his kin, appreciated good food and drink, liked the sound of songs well sung. But even in celebration, others could sense a quality in him that set him apart. He was present but also somehow separate, engaged but also observing, participating while maintaining the distance necessary for judgment. This quality made some uncomfortable, for it reminded them that their actions were being witnessed, that justice had eyes and memory. Others found comfort in his presence, knowing that someone was watching, that fairness existed and could be appealed to when needed. As the ages turned and the world continued its slow evolution toward the shape it would hold in later times, Tyr's importance in the divine order became more established. He was not the mightiest of gods in terms of raw power. Thor could summon storms that shook the pillars of heaven. Odin possessed wisdom that pierced the veils of time and space. But Tyr had something equally valuable. He had the trust of all parties, the reputation for fairness that made his word final, and his judgments accepted. This reputation would soon be tested in a way that would change him forever, that would mark him as different from all other gods, that would establish his legend in terms that would last until the end of all things. But before that test came, he had these years of preparation, of learning, of becoming the being who could face what was coming with courage and honor intact. The story of Tyr is long and winds through many ages of the world. It touches on themes that echo through all existence: duty and sacrifice, honor and loss, the price of maintaining order in a chaotic cosmos. His tale is not one of simple heroism or easy victories. It is something deeper, more complex, more true to the difficult nature of justice itself. Part 2. The Growing Darkness. While Tyr grew into his role among the gods, elsewhere in the 9 realms, something was stirring that would eventually cross his path in a way that would define both their destinies. In the dark lands of the frost giants, in a cave where shadows gathered thick and cold, A child was being born who would become one of the most feared creatures in all the world. The mother was a giantess named Angrboda, whose name meant bringer of sorrow. She lived far from the halls of gods and men, in a place where ice never melted and the sun rarely penetrated the permanent twilight. The father was Loki, the trickster god who walked between worlds, who belonged fully to neither Asgard nor Jotunheim, who was friend and sometimes foe to the god. From this union came 3 children, each stranger and more terrible than the last. The first was Jormungandr, who would grow into the world's serpent, so large it would eventually encircle all of Midgard and bite its own tail. The second was Hel, who would become the keeper of the dead, ruling over the realm of those who died without glory in battle. And the third, the youngest, was Fenrir. Fenrir was a wolf, but no ordinary beast. From his first breath, there was something about him that spoke of power beyond normal understanding. His eyes gleamed with intelligence that was almost divine. His fur was black as the spaces between stars. When he opened his mouth, even as a pup, his teeth seemed too large, too sharp, too hungry for the size of his body. Loki looked upon his offspring with mixed pride and concern. He understood better than most what it meant to be different, to be viewed with suspicion, to exist on the boundaries of acceptance. These 3 children would face such treatment, he knew. They were born of his union with a giantess, born in the lands of the enemies of the gods, born with shapes and natures that inspired fear. News of these strange births reached Odin in Asgard. The Allfather, who could see much with his one remaining eye, looked into the future and saw shadows gathering around Loki's children. He saw Jormungandr grown massive, poisoning ocean and sky. He saw Hel presiding over the dead in her dark realm. And he saw Fenrir, grown to enormous size, breaking free from bonds and bringing destruction to gods and worlds alike. These visions troubled Odin deeply. He called a council of the gods to discuss what should be done. In the great hall where such meetings were held, with its high ceiling and its pillars carved with scenes of ancient battles and treaties, the divine beings gathered to debate the fate of 3 children who had not yet committed any crime, but whose futures looked dark. Thor argued for immediate action. The children were monsters, he claimed, offspring of giants, and therefore enemies by nature. They should be destroyed before they could grow into the threats that Odin's visions suggested. Others agreed with this harsh judgment, fearing what might come if the children were allowed to reach their full power. But other voices counseled caution. The goddess Frigg spoke of the injustice of punishing creatures for acts they had not yet committed. To kill children for what they might do in the future went against the very principles of fairness that the gods claimed to uphold. Several others supported this view, though more from pity than from principle. Tyr listened to all these arguments in silence. When the debate had gone on for some time, circling without resolution, Odin asked for his judgment. All eyes turned to the god of justice, waiting to hear what he would say about this difficult matter. Tyr stood and looked at each of the assembled deities. His face was calm but serious, his grey-blue eyes thoughtful. He spoke in a voice that carried throughout the hall without shouting, a voice that commanded attention through its very steadiness and clarity. He agreed that Odin's visions were concerning and should not be ignored. The Allfather's sight was rarely wrong, and to dismiss warnings of future danger would be foolish. However, to kill children for crimes they had not committed would violate every principle of justice that the gods claimed to honor. Such an action would make them no better than the most vicious of the beings they fought against. Instead, Tyr proposed a middle path. Bring the children to Asgard, where they could be watched and raised among the gods. Perhaps growing up in the halls of honor, rather than the caves of giants, would change their nature. Perhaps the dark futures Odin saw could be averted if the children were given different circumstances, different choices, different influences. This solution satisfied neither the harsh nor the gentle voices in the council, which perhaps indicated it was the right compromise. After more debate, Odin decreed that Tyr's judgment would be followed. The 3 children would be brought to Asgard and placed under divine supervision. Jormungandr was cast into the ocean that surrounded Midgard, for his nature was such that he needed vast space and could not be contained in any hall. Hel was sent to the underworld, given rule over those who died without glory, a necessary role that would provide her with purpose and place. But Fenrir was brought to Asgard itself, a wolf pup, carried through the golden gates into the realm of the gods. The gods looked upon the young wolf with varying degrees of fear and suspicion. Even as a pup, Fenrir was larger than normal wolves, his teeth sharper, his movements more powerful. But there was also something strangely appealing about him. His intelligence was obvious in his bright eyes. He seemed curious about everything, exploring the halls and grounds of Asgard with puppy enthusiasm. Most of the gods wanted nothing to do with Fenrir. They avoided him, whispered about him, watched him from distances. Only Tyr approached the wolf without fear or hostility. He had been the one to suggest bringing the creature to Asgard, and he felt responsibility for that decision. Moreover, his sense of justice insisted that Fenrir deserved a fair chance, deserved to be treated with the same respect given to any being under divine protection. Tyr began to spend time with the young wolf. He brought food and water, established a comfortable place for Fenrir to sleep, and most importantly, offered companionship without fear. Fenrir, who could sense the emotions of those around him, responded to this treatment. With Tyr alone among all the gods, the wolf relaxed. He wagged his tail, played as puppies do, and showed affection. A bond began to form between god and wolf. Tyr found himself genuinely enjoying Fenrir's company. The wolf was intelligent beyond any normal animal, able to understand speech, and even to communicate in his own way through gestures and sounds. His loyalty to Tyr, who treated him with kindness, was absolute. The god found this loyalty touching and found himself caring for the creature more than he had expected. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Fenrir grew rapidly, as magical creatures do. Soon he was the size of a large horse, his head reaching higher than a man's chest when he stood on all four legs. Still, he remained gentle with Tyr, playful and affectionate, greeting his friend with enthusiasm whenever the god appeared. But with other gods, Fenrir was different. He was not aggressive, but neither was he welcoming. He watched them with eyes that saw too much, that understood their fear and their distrust. Sometimes, when gods whispered about him thinking he could not hear, his lips would pull back slightly from his teeth, and something ancient and dangerous would flicker in his gaze. Tyr noticed these changes but tried to interpret them charitably. Fenrir was young and responding to the hostility he felt from others. If the gods would treat him better, the wolf would respond in kind. He pleaded Fenrir's case in the councils, asking his fellow deities to give the creature a real chance, to treat him with the fairness they claimed to value. Some made efforts to follow Tyr's advice. They would nod to Fenrir when passing, or leave food for him, or speak to him in neutral tones. But fear is difficult to hide, and Fenrir could smell it on them like a scent. He knew he was not truly welcome in Asgard, that only Tyr accepted him without reservation. This knowledge affected him, though he tried to hide it when with his friend. The wolf continued to grow. Within a year, he was larger than any horse that had ever lived. His paws left impressions in solid stone when he walked. His howl, when he gave voice to it, echoed across all of Asgard and into the realms beyond. Still Tyr defended him, still claimed that the wolf could be trusted, could become a guardian rather than a threat. But Odin continued to have troubling dreams. He saw Fenrir grown to impossible size, his jaws wide enough to encompass the sky itself. He saw the wolf breaking free during Ragnarok, the end time when all things would burn and die. He saw those terrible jaws closing around his own throat, ending the reign of the Allfather. These visions came more frequently as Fenrir grew, and they were always the same, always ending in blood and darkness. The Allfather called another council, and again the fate of Fenrir was debated. Some gods argued that the wolf had shown no aggression and should be left alone. Others insisted that his very existence was a threat, that his size and power were growing beyond any ability to control him. The debate grew heated, with strong feelings on both sides. Finally, a compromise was reached. Fenrir would not be killed, for he had committed no crime, but he must be bound, contained, prevented from growing so large and powerful that he could threaten the safety of Asgard and the 9 realms. The gods would create fetters to hold him, chains strong enough to contain his strength. Tyr's heart grew heavy when he heard this decision. He knew it was motivated by fear rather than justice. Fenrir had done nothing to deserve imprisonment, but he also understood the concerns of his fellow gods. If Odin's visions were true, and they usually were, then allowing Fenrir to grow without restraint could lead to catastrophe. The god of justice found himself caught between his principles and practical necessity, between his care for a creature he had befriended and his duty to protect the realm. This conflict troubled him deeply, but he accepted the council's decision. The chains would be made, and Fenrir would be tested with them. The first fetters were forged by the finest smiths in Asgard. They were made of iron as thick as a man's arm, links heavy enough that it took 4 gods to carry them. The chain was named Lighting, and it gleamed like dark silver in the light of the Asgard sun. The gods approached Fenrir with the chain, and their fear was obvious despite their attempts to hide it. They proposed the binding as a test of his strength, challenging the wolf to see if he could break free from the fetters. Fenrir looked at the chain, then at the gods, his intelligent eyes reading their true intentions easily. The wolf could have refused. He could have fought against the binding, could have used his great strength to resist. But he looked at Tyr, standing among the others, and saw trust and hope in his friend's face. For Tyr's sake, and because he was still young enough to believe that proving himself might win acceptance, Fenrir agreed to the test. The gods wrapped Lighting around the wolf's body, securing it with locks and bindings. The chain was heavy enough that most creatures could not even move beneath its weight. The gods stepped back, watching nervously to see what would happen. Fenrir tested the chain by tensing his muscles. The metal creaked under the pressure. He shifted his weight, and the links groaned. Then, with a sudden flex of power, the wolf burst through Lighting, as if it were made of grass, rather than iron. The chain shattered into pieces that scattered across the ground like broken toys. The gods stepped back in fear, awed by the strength they had just witnessed. But Fenrir made no aggressive move. He simply shook himself free of the broken links and looked at them, waiting to see what would happen next. His gaze lingered longest on Tyr, as if asking whether this test had been enough to prove his control and peaceful intentions. It had not been enough. The very ease with which Fenrir had broken Lighting only increased the gods' fear. If he could shatter such strong chains so easily, what hope did they have of containing him if he decided to turn against them? More urgent whispers filled the halls of Asgard. More councils were held. More debates about what should be done. The smiths went back to their forges. They worked day and night, using their finest skills and strongest materials. They created a second chain, even larger and heavier than the first. This one was made of the hardest iron mixed with divine metals, forged with spells of binding woven into every link. It was named Drami, and it was so heavy that it took 8 gods to carry it. Again the gods approached Fenrir, and again they framed the binding as a test of strength. They praised him for breaking Lighting, and challenged him to try his power against an even greater fetter. Fenrir looked at the massive chain, understanding that it was far stronger than the first. The wolf's eyes moved from the chain to the assembled gods, reading fear and determination in their faces. He understood now that this was not truly about testing his strength, but about containing him. Still, he looked to Tyr, and his friend's face showed conflict, but also hope. The god of justice believed that if Fenrir passed this test, proved that he could break free, but chose not to harm anyone, it might finally convince the others that the wolf could be trusted. For the second time, Fenrir allowed himself to be bound. Drami was wrapped around him in multiple layers, secured with complex knots and heavy locks. The weight of it would have crushed a mountain. The gods retreated to a safe distance, watching to see if their greatest smith work could hold the creature that had broken Lighting so easily. Fenrir lay still for a moment, beneath the weight of Drami. He felt the power of the chain, the strength of its forging, the magic woven into its link. It was formidable, far beyond the first chain's capability. Breaking it would require significant effort. The wolf began to strain against the fetters. His muscles bunched and swelled beneath his dark fur. The chains held firm, not giving even slightly. Fenrir increased his effort, pulling and pushing, testing every link for weakness. The chains creaked, but did not break. He growled, low and deep, a sound that made the watching gods step back even further. Then Fenrir truly exerted himself. His body seemed to expand with the effort, power flowing through him like a rising tide. He twisted and pulled with strength that shook the ground beneath him. The chains began to give way, links stretching under impossible force. With a sound like thunder, Dromi burst apart, its pieces flying in all directions with enough force to embed themselves in walls and ground. Fenrir stood free once more, breathing heavily from the effort. This time breaking the chains had not been easy. His strength had been tested, pushed to its limit, but he had prevailed, and now he stood among broken metal, looking at the gods who had bound him. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Fenrir could have attacked then, could have taken revenge for being bound twice, for being treated as a threat rather than as an honored guest in Asgard. The gods tensed, ready to defend themselves, knowing their weapons would likely prove useless against such power. But Fenrir simply shook himself clean of the broken chain and walked away. He went to the place where Tyr fed him, lay down, and waited for his friend to come. He had proven his point twice now. He had broken the chains, but had not attacked, had not even threatened. Surely this would be enough. It was not enough. The ease with which Fenrir had broken even Dromi terrified the gods more than ever. They had seen the full measure of his power now, and it exceeded their worst fears. The wolf was still growing, still gaining strength with each passing day. If he was this powerful now, what would he become in a few more years? What could possibly stop him if he decided to turn against Asgard? Odin made a decision. Normal chains could not hold Fenrir. The smiths of Asgard, skilled as they were, could not create fetters strong enough to contain such power. But there were others in the 9 realms whose craft exceeded even divine smithwork. The dwarves who worked in the roots of mountains and knew secrets of forging that others could not comprehend, might be able to create what was needed. The Allfather sent messengers to the dark halls where the dwarves dwelt, far beneath the surface world. He asked them to create a fetter that could hold Fenrir, something strong enough that not even the wolf's great power could break it. The price would be high, for dwarves did not work cheaply, especially when asked to create something unique and powerful. But Odin was willing to pay whatever was necessary. The dwarves took on this challenge with enthusiasm. They gathered materials from across the 9 realms, things that seemed impossible to use in chain making. They collected the sound of a cat's footsteps, which explained why cats move so silently. They gathered the breath of fish and the beard of women, things that did not exist, and therefore could not be broken. They collected the roots of mountains, which was why mountains had no roots, and the spittle of birds, and the sinews of bears. From these impossible materials, the dwarves wove a ribbon. It was not a chain of metal like Lyding and Drummy had been. Instead, it was smooth and thin and soft as silk, deceptively delicate in appearance. But within its weave was magic older and stranger than almost anything in the 9 realms. It could not be broken by any force, for it was made of things that were not, and therefore could not be unmade. The dwarves named it Gleipnir, and they delivered it to Odin with warnings. This ribbon would hold any creature, even Fenrir, but binding the wolf with it would come at a cost, for such powerful magic always demanded payment. What that cost would be, the dwarves could not say. The price would reveal itself when the binding was attempted. Odin accepted Gleipnir, despite the warning. He had little choice. Fenrir continued to grow, and his power was becoming such that soon even the combined might of all the gods might not be enough to stop him if he turned violent. The ribbon must be used, and whatever price needed to be paid would be paid. The god of justice stood in the halls of Asgard, holding the thin ribbon in his hands, and felt the weight of what was coming settle onto his shoulders, like a physical burden. He alone among all the gods understood that this would not end well, that the path they were walking led to tragedy. But he also understood that sometimes there were no good choices, only necessary ones. Part 3. The Binding. The day came when the gods decided to bind Fenrir with Gleipnir. They chose a place for this test, if test it could still be called. There was an island far from Asgard's golden halls, a lonely piece of land in the middle of a dark lake. The island was named Lyngvi, and it had no beauty or comfort to recommend it. It was simply isolated, far from anything that could be damaged if events went poorly. The gods made plans for how to approach Fenrir with this third binding. The wolf had allowed himself to be chained twice before, trusting in the fairness of the tests proposed. But he was not foolish. He had surely noticed that each chain was meant to be stronger than the last, that the gods were not truly testing his strength, but seeking to contain him. Would he allow a third attempt? They decided to frame it as they had before, as a challenge to Fenrir's great power. They would show him how thin and weak Gleipnir appeared, would mock it as unworthy of his strength, would suggest that breaking this ribbon would be easier than breaking the massive chains he had already shattered. Perhaps his pride would lead him to accept the binding, and once Gleipnir was secured, he would find himself held fast. Tyr listened to these plans with a heavy heart. He knew Fenrir well enough by now to understand that the wolf would see through this deception. The creature was too intelligent, had been disappointed too many times. He would recognize the trap for what it was. But Tyr also understood the necessity of what they were attempting. If Odin's visions were true, if Fenrir truly would bring destruction during Ragnarok, then he must be bound. The god of justice went to Fenrir the night before the planned binding. He found the great wolf lying beneath the stars, his massive form dark against the ground. Fenrir's eyes opened as Tyr approached, and in them, the god saw knowledge and sadness. Tyr sat beside his friend, and they remained together in silence for a long time. No words were needed. Fenrir understood what was coming. He had felt the fear in Asgard growing stronger with each day, had sensed preparations being made. He knew the gods meant to bind him again, and this time with something they believed would hold. The wolf had choices before him. He could refuse to go to the island. He could resist now, before being bound, while he still had freedom to use his power. He could leave Asgard entirely, flee to the wild places of the 9 realms, where the gods might never find him. All these options existed, and Fenrir was certainly strong enough to make any of them reality. But beside him sat Tyr, the one being in all the realms who had shown him kindness without reservation. The god who had argued for bringing him to Asgard, rather than destroying him as a child. The friend who had spent countless hours in his company, who had never shown fear or distrust. Whatever happened tomorrow, Fenrir did not want to make Tyr's situation more difficult than it already was. The night passed slowly. When dawn came, the gods gathered to make the journey to Lyngvi. They traveled in a procession, some on horses, others walking, a few flying through the air on magical clouds, or carried by creatures of power. Fenrir walked among them, his great form towering over all but the largest god. Tyr walked beside the wolf, his hands sometimes resting on the dark fur, feeling the warmth and strength beneath. The journey to the lake took most of the day. When they arrived, the water stretched dark and still before them. The island sat in its center like a rough stone, bare of trees or grass, just grey rock rising from black water. Boats had been prepared to carry the gods across, but Fenrir simply waded into the lake, his legs so long that the water barely reached his chest. Tyr traveled in a boat beside him, and they crossed together to Lyngvi. On the island, the gods formed a circle around an open space. Odin stood at the center, and in his hands, he held Gleipnir. The ribbon gleamed in the light, looking impossibly delicate. It was no thicker than a silk scarf, soft and flexible, appearing as if a child could tear it apart with no effort. The Allfather spoke to Fenrir in a voice that carried across the island. He praised the wolf's great strength, recounting how easily he had broken liding and drumming. Then he held up Gleipnir and spoke of it mockingly, calling it a mere ribbon, a trivial thing unworthy of such power. He challenged Fenrir to allow himself to be bound with it, suggesting that breaking free would take less effort than a single breath. Fenrir looked at the ribbon with his intelligent eyes. He looked at Odin, at the assembled gods, at their faces that tried to hide anticipation and fear. He looked longest at Tyr, standing slightly apart from the others, his expression pained and conflicted. The wolf understood everything in that moment. This was not a test. This was a trap. The ribbon, despite its appearance, was meant to hold him forever. The great wolf spoke then, not in words, but in a way that all present understood. His meaning was clear. If this ribbon was truly as weak as Odin claimed, the gods could test it themselves. If it was so easy to break, they should demonstrate this. But if it was meant to hold him, if it was a binding he could not escape, then he would not accept it willingly, unless one of the gods was willing to pay a price for such deception. The gods looked at each other uneasily. No one stepped forward. They all understood what Fenrir was asking. He wanted a guarantee, a pledge of good faith. If the ribbon was truly breakable as they claimed, they had nothing to fear from giving such a pledge. But if it was unbreakable, if they were lying to him, then one of them would suffer for that lie. Long moments passed in silence. The water lapped against the shores of Lyngvi. The wind moved across the lake, bringing scents of distant lands. The gods remained still, no one willing to step forward and give what Fenrir asked. Finally, Tyr moved. He walked from his place at the edge of the circle to stand before Fenrir. The wolf looked down at his friend, and in his eyes was knowledge of what this meant. Tyr understood it too. The god of justice knew that Gleipnir would hold. The dwarves had made it too well, for materials too strange and powerful. Once Fenrir was bound, he would not break free. But someone had to make this pledge. Someone had to place their body as guarantee that the gods were acting in good faith, even though they were not. Without such a pledge, Fenrir would refuse the binding, and then conflict would come immediately rather than being delayed. The wolf would have to be attacked, fought, possibly killed, and many gods would die in the attempt. Tyr looked at Fenrir and spoke quietly, for the wolf's ears alone. He told his friend that he was sorry. He explained that sometimes justice required actions that felt wrong, that sometimes preventing future harm meant causing present pain. He acknowledged that this binding was not fair, that Fenrir had committed no crime that deserved imprisonment. But he also spoke of the visions Odin had seen, of the destruction that might come if the wolf remained free to grow and gain power. The god of justice made a promise then. He told Fenrir that even if bound, he would not be abandoned. Tyr would ensure that food and water were brought to the island. He would visit when allowed. The wolf would not be left alone and forgotten. It was a small comfort to offer against such a great injustice, but it was all Tyr had to give. Fenrir listened to his friend's words. He understood the truth behind them. Tyr was not deceiving him. The god genuinely believed this binding was necessary, even while hating the necessity of it. The wolf could have refused anyway. He could have turned and fought his way free from the island, could have killed many gods before they brought him down. But looking at Tyr's face, seeing the pain and conflict there, Fenrir made a choice. He agreed to the binding, but with a condition. If Gleipnir proved unbreakable, if the gods had lied about the ribbon being easily torn, then Tyr must place his right hand in Fenrir's mouth during the binding. This would serve as the pledge of good faith that Fenrir required. If the gods were truthful, Tyr would be in no danger. But if they were lying, if the ribbon held when they had promised it would not, then the wolf would bite down. The gods heard this condition and fell silent. They all knew what it meant. They were lying. Gleipnir would hold word. Tyr would lose his hand. But what choice did they have? Without someone making this pledge, Fenrir would not accept the binding, and their plans would collapse into immediate violence. All eyes turned to Tyr. The god of justice stood very still, processing what had been asked of him. He knew Gleipnir would hold. He knew he would lose his hand. This was not a possibility, but a certainty. The price the dwarves had warned of was now clear. It would be paid in his flesh, in his sacrifice. He could refuse. No law or obligation required him to make this pledge. He could step back, allow events to unfold differently, let conflict come now, rather than enabling this deception. But Tyr understood something that perhaps the other gods did not fully grasp. Sometimes justice required not just fair judgment, but personal sacrifice. Sometimes the maintainer of order must pay the price for that order himself. Tyr looked at his right hand, the hand that had fed Fenrir, that had stroked his fur, that had gestured in friendship countless times. It was a good hand, strong and capable. He had used it to write laws, to gesture when making judgments, to clasp an oath with others. Losing it would diminish him, would mark him forever as different, would make many tasks more difficult. But refusing would mean immediate war, would mean Fenrir's death, or the deaths of many gods, would mean all the work of years trying to give the wolf a chance at peaceful existence would end in blood. Against that certainty, the loss of a hand seemed almost small, though his heart clenched at the thought. The god of justice made his decision. He nodded to Fenrir, accepting the condition. Then he turned to the other gods, and saw relief and guilt mingled in their faces. They knew what he was about to sacrifice. They would remember this, would owe him a debt that could never be fully repaid. But in that moment, their relief at having the situation resolved outweighed their guilt at the cost. Fenrir lay down on the grey stone of Lyngvi. His great body stretched across the rock, dark fur against grey surface. The gods approached with Gleipnir, and their hands shook slightly as they began to wind the ribbon around the wolf's massive form. The ribbon felt strange to touch, silky and smooth, but also somehow wrong, as if it existed partially in some other dimension where normal rules did not apply. Tyr stepped forward as they wound the ribbon. He looked into Fenrir's eyes one last time, seeing forgiveness there mixed with regret. The wolf opened his jaws, revealing teeth as long as swords, white and sharp and terrible. The god placed his right hand into that mouth, feeling the heat of Fenrir's breath, the smoothness of his fangs. He positioned his hand carefully, wrist between the mighty teeth, and waited. The gods finished binding Fenrir with Gleipnir. They wrapped the ribbon around him multiple times, weaving it into complex patterns, securing it with knots that seemed to tie themselves. When they were done, they stepped back and waited to see what would happen. Fenrir tested the bonds. He tensed his muscles as he had done with Lyding and drumming. The ribbon did not stretch or creep. He pushed harder, exerting more force. Gleipnir remained unchanged, not even tightening or loosening around him. The wolf increased his effort, straining with all his tremendous strength. The ground beneath him cracked from the force he generated, but the ribbon held firm. For long minutes, Fenrir struggled against Gleipnir. He twisted and pulled, thrashed and strained, using every bit of his power. The ribbon did not give even slightly. It held him as easily as if he were a newborn pup, rather than a creature of immense might. The impossible materials from which it was woven made it unbreakable by any force in any realm. Finally, Fenrir stopped struggling. He lay still on the stone, breathing heavily, and accepted what he had already known from the moment he saw the ribbon. He was caught. The gods had lied. Gleipnir would not break, and he would not go free. The wolf's jaws closed. Tyr felt the teeth press against his flesh, felt the terrible strength in those massive jaws. He did not cry out, or try to pull away. He had made a pledge, and he would honor it. The price had been set, and he would pay it without complaint. Fenrir bit down with controlled force. He did not savage the hand or crush it beyond recognition. Despite his anger and a sense of betrayal, the wolf still had enough care for his friend not to cause more harm than was necessary. The teeth cut cleanly through flesh and bone. Tyr's right hand separated from his wrist and fell into Fenrir's mouth. The god of justice gasped at the pain, but did not scream. He pulled his arm back, blood flowing from the severed wrist. The watching gods rushed forward to help him, wrapping the wound, using magic to stop the bleeding, supporting him as he swayed from the shock. Through all of this, Tyr remained silent, his face pale but composed. Fenrir lay bound upon Lyngvi, and in his mouth was the hand of the one god who had been his friend. He did not swallow it or spit it out. He simply held it there for a moment, a testament to trust betrayed, to friendship sacrificed on the altar of necessity. Then, with something like gentle care, he let the hand fall from his mouth to lie on the stone beside him. The gods secured Gleipnir to the island itself, using a massive stone that was driven deep into the rock of Lyngvi. They tied the ribbon to this stone with knots that could never be undone. Fenrir was fixed in place, unable to move more than a few feet in any direction. And because the wolf opened his mouth wide in anger and grief, howling his rage at the betrayal, they took a sword and placed it in his jaws, the hilt against his lower jaw, and the point against his upper, forcing his mouth to stay open. Foam began to run from Fenrir's mouth, flowing like a river from his locked jaw. This foam would become a river called Van, the River of Hope, though what hope was in it remained unclear. The great wolf lay bound upon the grey island, unable to close his mouth, unable to break free, trapped until the end of all things by a ribbon made of impossible materials. The gods left Lyngvi, returning to their boats, sailing back across the dark lake. They did not speak much during the journey. The weight of what they had done hung over them like a cloud. They had captured Fenrir, had prevented the danger he might have posed. But they had done so through deception, through breaking trust, through accepting the sacrifice of the most honorable among them. Tyr sat in his boat, cradling his wounded arm. His right hand was gone, left behind on the island with the wolf who had been his friend. The pain was intense, but the god barely noticed it. He was thinking of Fenrir's eyes as the binding became clear, of the betrayal and hurt in that intelligent gaze. He was thinking of whether there had been any other way, any path that could have avoided this ending. In the days that followed, healers worked on Tyr's arm. They could not restore the hand, for once severed by such magic and such circumstances, it was gone beyond any recall. But they closed the wound, used divine power to ensure it would heal cleanly. Tyr would live with this loss for the rest of his existence, a mark of the price he had paid for the binding of Fenrir. The other gods treated him with new respect, mixed with a kind of awe. He had sacrificed his hand for the safety of Asgard, had paid a personal price that none of them had been willing to pay. They honored him for this, called him the bravest of the gods, composed songs and poems about his courage. But Tyr found little comfort in such praise. He knew the truth of what had happened. It was not true courage to sacrifice his hand. It was simply duty, the cost of maintaining the justice he had sworn to uphold. And mixed with duty was guilt, for he had enabled a great injustice. Fenrir had committed no crime, had harmed no one, had been loyal and gentle with his friend. Yet he was now imprisoned for what he might do in the future, bound through deception and betrayal. This weight settled onto Tyr's shoulders and never fully lifted. He continued his work as the god of justice, still settled disputes, still made judgments, still maintained the laws and order of Asgard. But something had changed in him. He understood now in a deeper way the complexity of justice, how sometimes doing what was necessary meant acting against what was right, how sometimes maintaining order required accepting injustice. The god began to visit Lyngvi whenever he could. He would travel across the dark lake to the grey island where Fenrir lay bound. The wolf could not speak with his mouth held open by the sword, could not move freely with Gleipnir securing him to the stone, but his eyes still held intelligence and awareness. When Tyr came, those eyes followed him with mixed emotion. There was anger in Fenrir's gaze, certainly. He had been betrayed by those who claimed to value honor and truth. There was pain, both physical from his eternal discomfort and emotional from his isolation and imprisonment. But there was also something else when the wolf looked at Tyr. Not quite forgiveness, perhaps, but understanding. Fenrir knew that his friend had sacrificed greatly, had paid a price that no other god had been willing to pay. Tyr would sit on the stone beside the wolf and speak quietly. He would tell Fenrir about events in Asgard, about the changing seasons, about the other realms of Yggdrasil. He would bring news and share thoughts, maintaining the companionship they had once shared as much as circumstances allowed. The wolf could not respond in words, but Tyr felt that Fenrir listened, that the visits brought some small comfort to his trapped friend. Other gods did not understand these visits. Some thought Tyr was foolish to continue caring for a creature that had taken his hand. Others feared that he was somehow trying to help Fenrir escape, though what he could possibly do against the unbreakable Gleipnir, they could not say. But none tried to stop the visit. They owed Tyr too much, and his sacrifice had earned him the right to act as he thought best. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. Time in the divine realms moved strangely, not quite matching the flow in mortal world. Through all this time, Fenrir remained bound on Lyngvi, and Tyr continued his visits when he could. The god of justice went about his duties with his left hand now doing the work his right had once performed. He adapted to the loss, learned new ways of doing things, compensated for what was missing. But the stump where his right hand had been remained a constant reminder. When he looked at it, he thought of the wolf, of the binding, of the choice he had made. Sometimes he wondered if it had been the right choice. Other times, he was certain it had been necessary, regardless of whether it was right. The distinction between necessary and right, between duty and justice, had become his constant meditation. The binding of Fenrir became legendary throughout the 9 realms. Humans in Midgard heard the story and were awed by Tyr's sacrifice. They made him their patron for keeping oaths, for they understood that he had honored his pledge even knowing the cost. Warriors particularly revered him, for they saw in his action the kind of courage that mattered most. Not the courage of battle, but the courage to accept necessary loss. In Asgard, Tyr's role evolved somewhat after the binding. He was still the god of justice, still made judgments and maintained laws. But he also became the god associated with noble sacrifice, with doing hard things for the greater good. When difficult decisions needed to be made, when someone had to accept personal cost for communal benefit, the other gods would think of Tyr and his missing hand. The god himself carried the weight of his choice quietly. He did not speak of it often, did not seek praise or recognition for what he had done. When asked about his hand, he would simply say that it was the price of keeping an oath, and leave it at that. He understood that some who heard the story saw him as heroic, while others saw the situation as tragic. Both views contained truth. Deep in his heart, Tyr held complex feelings about Fenrir. He did not hate the wolf, even though Fenrir had taken his hand. He understood that the bite had been entirely just, the legitimate consequence of the god's deception. If anything, Fenrir had shown restraint by not biting harder, by not severing the arm at the elbow or shoulder, by not killing Tyr entirely as he could have easily done. At the same time, Tyr could not fully regret the binding. Odin's visions were not to be dismissed lightly. The Allfather had seen true futures before, had perceived threats that later materialized exactly as predicted. If Fenrir unbound would truly bring destruction during Ragnarok, then preventing that, even through unjust means, served a greater good. The god of justice found himself caught between acknowledging injustice and accepting necessity, unable to fully resolve the contradiction. This unresolved tension became part of who Tyr was. He carried it with him through the ages, a weight that never lightened, but that he learned to bear. It made him more thoughtful in his judgments, more careful about the difference between punishment and prevention, more aware of how easily justice could be bent to serve fear rather than fairness. Part 4. The Years Between. After the binding of Fenrir, the 9 realms continued their existence, through ages of relative peace and occasional conflict. Tyr continued his role among the gods, adapting to his new limitation, growing in wisdom from his experience. His story during these long years was not one of great adventures or epic battles, but of steady service, quiet thought, and the maintenance of divine order. The god of justice found that losing his right hand changed his perspective in subtle ways. He had to rely more on others for tasks that required 2 hands. He had to ask for help, had to accept vulnerability, had to acknowledge limitation. These experiences, humbling for a divine being, gave him deeper understanding of what it meant to depend on community and trust. His judgments became, if anything, more nuanced after the binding of Fenrir. Where once he might have seen situations in clear terms of right and wrong, he now understood that most conflicts existed in gray areas between extremes. He became known not just for fairness, but for wisdom, for the ability to see all sides of a dispute and find resolutions that acknowledged complexity rather than imposing simple solution. The missing hand also served as a teaching tool. When young gods or mortal heroes came seeking his counsel, Tyr would sometimes gesture with his truncated arm, reminding them that every choice carried cost, that honor required sacrifice, that justice was not free. The visible mark of his sacrifice made his lessons more powerful, for they could see that he taught from experience rather than theory. In Midgard, the human world, Tyr's worship grew during these years. Humans facing difficult decisions would call upon him, asking for courage to do what was necessary. Warriors entering battle would invoke his name, not asking for victory as they might from Thor or Odin, but asking for honor in combat, for the strength to fight bravely regardless of outcome, for the courage to keep oaths even when death approached. The god appreciated this worship, finding it purer than some of the devotion given to other deities. His followers did not ask him for easy gifts or certain victories. They asked only for the strength to act with honor, to face difficulty without faltering, to maintain their integrity when tested. These were prayers that resonated with Tyr's nature and his experience. He would sometimes walk among humans in disguise, observing how they struggled with questions of justice and honor. He saw communities trying to establish fair laws, saw individuals choosing between self-interest and communal good, saw the constant tension between what people wanted and what was right. These observations reminded him that his concerns were not unique to gods. that every thinking being faced similar struggles. During one such visit to Midgard, Tyr encountered a village torn by conflict. Two families claimed ownership of the same fertile land, both with reasonable arguments for their position. The dispute had escalated to violence, with members of each family injured or killed. The survivors were preparing for a final confrontation that would likely destroy both families and harm many innocent villagers caught between them. The god approached the village leaders in disguise as a wandering arbitrator. He offered to judge between the two families if they would agree to accept his decision. Desperate for any resolution that might prevent more bloodshed, the leaders agreed. The families, exhausted by their conflict and frightened by its escalation, also consented to submit to outside judgment. Tyr listened to both sides present their cases. Each family had documents supporting their claim. Each had witnesses who testified to their ancestors working the land. Each had suffered losses in the conflict and believed their pain justified continued fighting. The god listened for 3 full days, asking questions, examining evidence, considering every aspect of the dispute. On the 4th day, he delivered his judgment. The land would be divided between the families, but not equally. The family that had struck the first violent blow would receive slightly less, for they had chosen to escalate from argument to warfare. However, both families would work the land cooperatively for 1 full generation, sharing labor and harvest, before the division became final. This arrangement would force them to cooperate, to rebuild trust, to see each other as people rather than enemies. Additionally, both families would contribute resources to compensate the innocent villagers who had suffered from their conflict. The families had been so focused on their dispute that they had not considered how their actions affected others. Making restitution would remind them that their choices had broader consequences. The judgment was fair, but difficult. Neither family got everything they wanted. Both had to accept responsibility for harm caused. Both had to work together, despite their anger and grief. Yet both agreed that it was just, that it balanced competing claims while looking toward future peace rather than past grievances. After delivering this judgment, Tyr revealed his divine nature to the village. The people were awed and grateful, offering prayers and sacrifices. But the god deflected their gratitude, explaining that he had simply helped them see what they could have found themselves if fear and anger had not clouded their vision. Every person present had the capacity for justice, he told them. They needed only courage to choose it. This incident was typical of Tyr's involvement in mortal affairs during the long years between Fenrir's binding and the events that would eventually lead to Ragnarok. He did not seek to rule over humans or demand constant worship. Instead, he served as occasional guide and counselor, helping communities and individuals find paths toward fairness and honor when their own efforts faltered. Back in Asgard, Tyr's relationship with the other gods remained complex. They respected him, certainly. His sacrifice had earned their admiration, and his judgments were valued throughout the divine realm. But there was also distance between him and many of his kin. He was different from them in ways that sometimes made interaction difficult. Where Thor sought glory and excitement, Tyr sought fairness and order. Where Odin pursued wisdom and power, even at great cost, Tyr maintained principles that he would not compromise regardless of benefit. Where Loki sought novelty and change, delighting in disruption, Tyr represented stability and tradition. These differences meant that while respected, Tyr was not always understood or particularly close to most other deities. There were exceptions. For Seti, who would become the god of justice and reconciliation, learned much from Tyr. The older god served as mentor to the younger, teaching not just laws and precedents, but the deeper principles underlying fair judgment. Seti absorbed these lessons and would eventually develop his own approach to justice, one that emphasized reconciliation more than Tyr's focus on proper balance. Tyr also maintained good relations with some of the goddesses who appreciated his steady nature. Frigg, Odin's wife and the goddess of domestic matters and foresight, valued Tyr's reliability and his respect for proper order. Sif, Thor's wife, appreciated his calm presence as a contrast to her husband's more volatile nature. With these, and a few other deities, Tyr formed friendships built on mutual respect, rather than shared adventures or ambitions. But his closest relationship, strange as it was, remained with Fenrir. The god continued his visits to Lyngvi, crossing the dark lake to sit with the bound wolf. These visits became more frequent as time passed, as if Tyr felt increasing need to maintain this connection. Some said he was simply checking that the binding remained secure. Others whispered that he was maintaining a friendship despite impossible circumstances. The truth likely contained elements of both. During these visits, Tyr would sit by the wolf and speak about philosophical matters. He would discuss the nature of justice, debating with himself since Fenrir could not respond. He would wrestle with questions about whether ends justified means, whether preventing future harm excused present injustice, whether order was worth the cost of freedom. These one-sided conversations helped Tyr process his ongoing internal conflict about Fenrir's binding. Sometimes other gods accompanied Tyr to Lyngvi, curious about his continued attention to the wolf. They would see Fenrir lying bound, mouth held open by the sword, eyes following Tyr's movement. The foam river vein continued to flow from the wolf's jaws, a constant reminder of his discomfort and rage. Yet when Tyr approached, something in Fenrir's posture would shift slightly, a subtle relaxation that suggested recognition and perhaps even welcome. These observers found the dynamic between god and wolf unsettling. They could not understand how Tyr could care for a creature that had taken his hand, or why Fenrir showed any sign of positive response to his captor. The relationship seemed to violate expected patterns of victim and victimizer, prisoner and guard. It existed in some space beyond simple categories, built on shared history and mutual sacrifice. Years accumulated like snowfall, covering the past with layers of subsequent events. The binding of Fenrir became old history, something that had happened long ago. New gods were born or joined the divine community, and to them, Tyr was simply the one-handed god of justice, distinguished by his missing limb and his reputation for fair judgment. They knew the story of Fenrir, but as tale rather than as lived experience. Through all these years, Tyr maintained his duties. He settled disputes among gods, established precedents for divine law, occasionally intervened in mortal affairs when justice required divine attention. His work was steady rather than spectacular, crucial rather than celebrated. The order of the 9 realms depended partly on foundations he built and maintained, though few thought about this explicitly. The god aged in the manner of divine beings, which is to say not in body, but in spirit. His face carried lines that reflected thought rather than years. His grey-blue eyes held depths of experience and understanding. His missing hand remained as it had been, a permanent mark of a choice made long ago. To those who looked closely, they could see that Tyr carried weight, that his steady demeanor concealed ongoing inner conflict, that his justice was hard-won rather than naturally given. During this long period between Fenrir's binding and the approach of Ragnarok, one incident stands out as particularly significant for understanding Tyr's character and his evolution. A conflict arose between Asgard and one of the realms of the Light Elves. The elves claimed that gods had broken an ancient treaty, taking more than was agreed from the elves' forests. The gods countered that the elves were misinterpreting the treaty, that the agreement allowed what had been taken. Both sides prepared for war. The elves were formidable, despite being less powerful than God. They had magic of their own, alliances with other realms, and intimate knowledge of the forests where any conflict would take place. A war between Asgard and the Light Elves would be bloody and prolonged, with uncertain outcome and certain suffering. Odin, as All-Father, wanted to press the issue. He believed the gods were in the right, and that showing weakness would encourage other realms to challenge divine authority. Thor and many other gods agreed, seeing an opportunity to demonstrate Asgard's power. They began mustering forces, preparing for conflict. Tyr examined the ancient treaty in question. He studied the language carefully, considering context and intent as well as specific words. After thorough investigation, he delivered an opinion that surprised many. The elves were correct in their interpretation. The treaty's language, while ambiguous, supported their position when understood in the context of when it was written. The gods had indeed taken more than was agreed. This judgment put Tyr in direct opposition to Odin and the majority of Asgard's power structure. The Allfather was displeased, arguing that even if technically the elves were correct, the practical matter was that gods needed the resources and had the might to take them. Tyr responded that might did not make right, that justice required acknowledging truth even when inconvenient, that breaking treaties destroyed the foundations of order that gods claimed to represent. The disagreement became heated. Some gods supported Tyr, agreeing that maintaining honor required admitting error. Others sided with Odin, arguing that practical concerns outweighed technical correctness. The divine community was split, and for a time, it seemed that internal conflict might precede or even prevent the external war with the elves. Tyr held firm in his position despite pressure from the Allfather and many other powerful gods. He argued passionately that if the gods could not maintain justice among themselves and in their dealings with other realms, they had no moral authority to rule. If divine law meant nothing when inconvenient, then it meant nothing at all. His missing hand, he reminded them, was the price he had paid for maintaining oaths even when painful. Would they now declare that such sacrifices were meaningless? His argument, and more importantly, his willingness to stand alone against significant opposition, eventually swayed enough gods to force reconsideration. Odin, recognizing that pressing forward would split Asgard from within, accepted Tyr's judgment. The gods negotiated a new treaty with the elves, one that returned what had been improperly taken and established clearer terms for the future. War was averted, and relationships were strengthened rather than destroyed. This incident reinforced Tyr's position as the guardian of divine law and justice. Even the Allfather would defer to him on matters of proper interpretation and fair dealing. But it also increased the distance between Tyr and some of his more power-focused kin. They saw him as rigid, too willing to sacrifice practical advantage for abstract principle. He saw them as dangerously willing to abandon the very foundations that gave their power legitimacy. The years continued their slow progression. Seasons turned in Midgard. Stars moved through their patterns in the sky. The great tree, Yggdrasil, grew imperceptibly, its roots delving deeper, its branches reaching farther. And in all the 9 realms, beings lived their lives, generally unaware that these were the last peaceful ages before everything would change. Tyr felt the approaching shift even if he could not name it. He noticed small signs that others overlooked. The Norns at the Well of Fate seemed more active, their weaving more intense. Odin spent increasing time seeking prophecies, consulting sources of wisdom, looking anxiously toward possible futures. Even the weather in Asgard, usually stable and pleasant, began to show variability, with unexpected storms and unseasonable changes. The god of justice increased his visits to Lyngvi during this time. He would sit with Fenrir and speak about what might be coming. Though the wolf could not answer, Tyr felt that Fenrir understood something of future events. The wolf's eyes held knowledge, perhaps visions of his own, or perhaps simply the certainty that one bound unjustly will eventually break free. On one of these visits, Tyr did something he had never done before. He apologized to Fenrir, not for making the choice to sacrifice his hand, for that had been necessary, but for the situation that had required such choice, for the fear that had led to binding, for the injustice of imprisoning one who had committed no crime. He told the wolf that if there had been any other way, he would have found it. Fenrir's eyes, when Tyr spoke these words, held an expression difficult to interpret. Not quite forgiveness, for the wrong was too great. Not quite understanding, for understanding did not erase the suffering of centuries bound on a grey island. But perhaps acceptance, an acknowledgement that Tyr had acted according to his nature, just as Fenrir had acted according to his when he bit down on the offered hand. The god left Lyngvi that day feeling both heavier and lighter. He had spoken words that needed speaking, had acknowledged truth that needed acknowledgement. Whether it changed anything for Fenrir, he could not know. But it changed something within himself, settled some portion of the weight he had carried for so long. As time moved forward, the signs of approaching change became more obvious. The Norns spoke more openly of threads drawing together, of patterns approaching completion. Odin's one eye held increasing worry as his visions showed more clearly what was coming. The gods began to sense that their age of relative peace was ending, that something vast and terrible approached. Part 5. The approach of Ragnarok. The term Ragnarok meant the doom of the gods, the twilight of the divine powers, the end of the age. Prophecies about it existed from the earliest times, woven into the very fabric of creation. Even the gods, powerful as they were, could not escape the fate that had been established when the world began. They knew this day would come, though they had hoped it might be delayed indefinitely. The signs of Ragnarok's approach began small and grew larger. In Midgard, humans noticed that winters lasted longer and summers grew shorter. 3 consecutive winters came with no summer between them, a period called the Fimbulwinter. Snow fell constantly, frost covered everything, and cold penetrated to depths that had never frozen before. Crops failed, food stores ran out, and humanity began to struggle for survival. This hardship brought out both the best and worst in people. Some communities banded together, shared resources, helped each other through the terrible cold. Others fell into conflict, fighting over dwindling supplies, abandoning honor for survival. Tyr watched from Asgard, his heart heavy at the suffering below. He could not prevent Fimbulwinter, for it was part of the pattern leading to Ragnarok. But he could inspire, could send dreams and visions to those humans who struggled to maintain justice, even in desperate times. In the divine realms, other signs manifested. The world tree Yggdrasil began to tremble, its massive trunk shaking as if in fear or anticipation. The great eagle that sat in its highest branches cried out warnings. The dragon Nidhogg, which gnawed at Yggdrasil's deepest roots, increased its efforts, chewing through root after root. The tree that connected all worlds showed signs of stress, and if Yggdrasil fell, everything would fall with it. The gods held councils to discuss what should be done. Odin shared his visions more openly now, for there was no point in hiding what was coming. He had seen the great battle that would destroy most of the gods. He had seen Fenrir breaking free from Gleipnir. He had seen his own death in the wolf's jaws. He had seen fire consuming everything, the 9 realms burning until almost nothing remained. These visions were terrible, but also strangely specific. Ragnarok was not simply chaos and destruction. It followed patterns, fulfilled prophecies, represented an ending that was also a beginning. After the fire and the flood, after the battles and the deaths, a new world would emerge. Some gods would survive, some humans would endure, and life would continue in different forms. This knowledge provided cold comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Tyr listened to these prophecies with careful attention. He noted who was fated to fight whom, which gods would fall, and which would survive. His own fate in these visions was uncertain. Some prophecies mentioned him fighting alongside the other gods. Others suggested different roles. The details shifted depending on which source Odin consulted, which suggested that even in prophesied events, some element of choice remained. The god of justice began to prepare in his own way. He could not train for battle as Thor did, testing his strength and practicing with weapons. Tyr's power had never been primarily physical. Instead, he prepared spiritually and mentally, meditating on duty and courage, reinforcing his commitment to acting with honor regardless of outcome. He also visited Lyngvi more frequently, as if saying farewells before a long journey. Fenrir seemed more agitated during these visits. The wolf strained against Gleipnir with renewed effort, testing the bonds that had held him for so long. The ribbon still did not break, but the intensity of Fenrir's struggle suggested that he too felt the approaching change, knew that his time of binding was nearing its end. Tyr would sit by the wolf and speak about what was coming. He told Fenrir that when Ragnarok began, Gleipnir would break or Fenrir would find a way to escape it. The prophecies were clear on this point. The wolf would be free, and in his freedom, he would fulfill the role that fate had assigned him. Tyr did not know if he would face Fenrir in the final battle, but he wanted the wolf to understand that whatever happened, the god bore him no hatred, felt only regret that their story had unfolded as it had. As the signs of Ragnarok intensified, the gods began marshalling their forces. From Valhalla, Odin called forth the Einherjar, the warrior dead who had been training for exactly this moment. These were the humans who had died bravely in battle throughout all the ages of the world. They had feasted and fought in Odin's hall, preparing themselves for the final conflict when gods would need every warrior they could muster. The armies gathered on the plains of Asgard. Warriors without number, gods in their full power, creatures of magic and might all assembled for the coming battle. The sight was magnificent and terrible, a force that seemed unbeatable. Yet Odin's face remained grim, for he knew that even this might would not be enough. Heimdall, the watchman god who guarded the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, stood ready with his horn Gjallarhorn. When he blew this horn, its sound would echo across all 9 realms, signaling that Ragnarok had truly begun. The horn had never been blown at full strength before. Its sound at full volume would be heard by every living thing, from the highest god to the smallest insect in Midgard. It would be a call to final battle, to ultimate conflict, to the end of an age. Tyr took his place among the assembled gods. He wore armor for the first time in centuries, polished to brightness, but scarred from ancient battles. In his left hand, his only hand, he held a sword forged by dwarves long ago. The blade was straight and true, without ornamentation, a weapon made for function rather than display. It suited him perfectly. The god looked at his fellow deities as they prepared for what was coming. Thor checked his hammer Mjolnir for perhaps 1,000th time, lightning crackling around him. Odin sat on his throne with his spear Gungnir across his knees, both eyes closed as he consulted with sources of wisdom that others could not perceive. Freya moved among the Valkyries, speaking words of encouragement and strategy. Other gods made their own preparations according to their natures. In this moment, before the final battle, Tyr felt strange peace. He had lived a long life, had served justice as best he could, had made difficult choices, and lived with their consequences. He had sacrificed his hand for what he believed was necessary, had maintained honor even when it cost him greatly. Now, facing the end of all things, he felt no regret for his choices. He had been true to his nature, and that was all any being could do. The first sign that Ragnarok was truly beginning came from the sea. Jormungandr, the world serpent that had grown to encircle Midgard, began to move. The ocean rose in massive waves as the serpent stirred from his position. He released his own tail, which he had been biting for ages, and began to swim toward shore. The movement created storms across all the seas of Midgard, drowning coastlands and sending terror through surviving human population. Then came other signs in rapid succession. The mountains shook, and from the realm of fire came Sur, the fire giant who had existed since before the gods. He brought his flaming sword, which burned brighter than the sun, and behind him came legions of fire giants, ready to burn everything in their path. The earth split open in places, releasing heat and ash, turning day to twilight with the smoke that rose. From the realm of the frost giants came another army, led by Rim, a giant of immense size and power. The frost giants had long memories of their conflicts with the gods, and now they saw opportunity for revenge. They marched across frozen wastes toward Asgard, their numbers vast, their anger cold and patient. And then, most terrible of all, Gleipnir broke. The impossible ribbon that had held Fenrir for so long finally gave way, not because the wolf broke it through strength alone, but because the time had come, because fate decreed that this binding must end. Fenrir rose to his full height for the first time in ages, stretched his legs, closed his jaws that had been held open by the sword. The sword fell away, clattering on the stones of Lyngvi, no longer needed or relevant. The wolf had grown during his binding. Fed by rage and magic, sustained by the inevitability of this moment, he had become larger than mountain. When he opened his mouth, his lower jaw touched the earth, and his upper jaw scraped the sky. His eyes blazed with fire that had been building for centuries. He was vengeance incarnate, rage given form, the consequence of injustice returned to its source. Fenrir howled, and the sound shook all the 9 realms. It was a howl of freedom, of pain, of terrible purpose. Every being who heard it felt fear deep in their core, for it was the sound of endings, of accounts come due, of debts being collected. The wolf began to move, each step covering miles, heading toward Asgard and the final confrontation that prophecy had always promised. Heimdall saw all of this from his position at the Bifrost Bridge. The watchman god saw the armies approaching from multiple directions, saw the world serpent rising from the ocean, saw Fenrir loose and terrible, saw the beginning of the end. He raised Jalahorn to his lips and blew with all his strength. The sound of the horn was like nothing ever heard before. It was clear and piercing, penetrating every corner of every realm. It carried across the distances between worlds, through time and space, reaching into the past and the future, announcing that the moment had arrived. Warriors in Valhalla heard it and knew their time had come. Gods throughout Asgard heard it and prepared themselves. Even humans in Midgard, struggling through Fimbulwinter, heard the distant call and understood that something vast and terrible was happening in the realms above. The armies of the gods moved to meet the approaching threats. Thor went forth to face Jormungandr, the serpent that was his ancient enemy. They had fought before in inconclusive battles. This time would be different. This time, one or both would not survive the encounter. The Thunder God rode out with lightning crackling around him, eager for the combat despite knowing what prophecy said at its outcome. Odin prepared to face Fenrir. The Allfather knew that this meeting would be his last, that the wolf's jaws would close around him, that his reign would end in darkness and pain. Yet, he did not flinch from his fate. He had seen it coming for centuries and had prepared as best he could. If he must fall, he would fall as a warrior, fighting to the end. He mounted his 8-legged horse Sleipnir and rode toward the approaching wolf, Gungnir gleaming in his hand. Other gods moved to their own prophesied conflict. Freyr would face Surtur, though he lacked his finest weapon, having given it away for love long ago. Heimdall would battle Loki, the trickster who had caused so much of the trouble that led to this day. Each god had their destined opponent, their fated conflict, their appointed end or survival. Tyr stood among the forces, watching the approaching armies, and waited to see where he would be needed. The prophecies about his role were unclear, which meant perhaps that his fate was not entirely fixed. He might have choices still, decisions to make about how he would face this final battle. The thought was oddly comforting. Even at the end of all things, choice remained possible. The armies crashed together like ocean waves meeting cliff faces. The sound was enormous, the chaos complete. Weapons clashed against weapons. Magic tore through the air. Battle cries and death screams mingled into a terrible chorus. The plain before Asgard became a battlefield where gods and giants, humans and monsters, all fought in the twilight created by smoke and ash. Tyr fought with focused intensity, his single hand wielding his sword with precision rather than wild strength. He cut down frost giants that came at him, parried attacks from fire demons, held his ground against the tide of enemies. Around him, other gods fought their own battles, some winning, others falling, all caught up in the prophesied destruction. He saw Thor in the distance, locked in combat with Jormungandr. The world serpent coiled and struck, poison dripping from its fangs. Thor swung Mjolnir in great arcs, lightning answering his call. The battle between them shook the ground, their power so immense that both land and sky warped from the forces unleashed. Tyr could not see how that fight would end, but prophecy had been clear. Thor would slay the serpent, but would walk only 9 steps before falling dead from its poison. He saw Odin riding toward Fenrir, the Allfather small before the immense wolf. Gungnir flew from Odin's hand, striking Fenrir's shoulder but not slowing him. The wolf lunged forward, jaws wide, and caught Odin in a terrible bite. The Allfather disappeared into that dark mouth, his horse Sleipnir fleeing without its rider. The mighty Odin, ruler of gods, possessor of wisdom, seeker of knowledge, met his end in the jaws of the wolf he had ordered, bound so long ago. Tyr felt grief at Odin's fall, but there was no time to dwell on it. The battle continued around him, demanding attention, requiring action. He fought on, doing what he had always done, fulfilling his duty even as the world crumbled around him. He did not seek glory or a legendary death. He simply continued, steady and reliable, even in chaos. As he fought, Tyr found himself gradually moving toward where Fenrir stood over Odin's body. The wolf had grown still after killing the Allfather, as if surprised by his own action or perhaps by the emptiness of revenge. Around Fenrir, a space had cleared. Gods and warriors alike gave the great wolf wide berth, afraid to approach, uncertain what to do now that he had fulfilled his prophesied role. Tyr walked toward that cleared space, his sword lowered, his steps steady. He pushed through the lines of fighters, ignored the battles happening around him, focused only on reaching Fenrir. Some warriors called after him, warning him away from the wolf, but he paid them no attention. He had something he needed to do, though he was not entirely certain what it was. Fenrir saw Tyr approaching, and turned his massive head to watch. The wolf's eyes, still blazing with internal fire, fixed on the one-handed god. For a moment, the battle seemed to fade into background noise, the chaos becoming distant, until it was just god and wolf looking at each other across the ruined plain. Tyr stopped a short distance from Fenrir, close enough to be heard, far enough to show he was not attacking. He looked up, at the wolf, who had been his friend, who had taken his hand, who had been bound unjustly, and was now free. He saw in those eyes the same intelligence that had always been there, but now mixed with satisfaction at revenge achieved, and perhaps uncertainty about what came next. The god spoke then, his voice carrying clearly despite the surrounding chaos. He told Fenrir that he was sorry. Not sorry for the binding, which he still believed had been necessary, but sorry that necessity had required such injustice. Sorry that fear had overcome wisdom, that their friendship had been sacrificed to prophecy, that things had unfolded as they had. He told the wolf that he had always valued their bond, even after it was broken, even through all the years of Fenrir's imprisonment. Fenrir listened without moving, his great head tilted slightly as if considering these words. The wolf could have killed Tyr in an instant, could have taken revenge for his missing hand, just as he had taken revenge on Odin for the binding. But he did not move, did not attack, simply stood and listened to his old friend speak. Tyr continued, saying that he understood Fenrir's rage, understood his right to vengeance, understood that the wolf had every cause to hate all the gods who had deceived and imprisoned him. He said that if Fenrir needed to kill him, he would not resist. He had paid for his choice with his hand long ago, but if further payment was required, he was willing to give it. Justice demanded no less. The wolf's eyes held many emotions as he looked at Tyr. Anger was there still, burning hot even after Odin's death. But there was also memory of their friendship, recognition of Tyr's sacrifice, understanding that this god at least had acted from principle rather than pure fear. Fenrir had taken Tyr's hand as justice for betrayal, but that debt had been paid. The hand had been freely offered, consciously sacrificed. There was no additional debt to collect. Slowly, Fenrir turned away from Tyr. The wolf began to move across the battlefield, his massive form stepping over fallen warriors and crushed weapon. He was heading away from Asgard, away from the battle, toward some destination known only to him. Perhaps he sought other enemies, other conflict. Perhaps he simply wanted to leave this place of his binding and his revenge. Whatever his purpose, he left Tyr standing unharmed. A choice that spoke of mercy, or perhaps of recognition that some bonds remained unbroken, even after betrayal and imprisonment. Tyr watched the wolf depart, and felt something within him settle. Not closure exactly, for their story could never truly be closed, could never be resolved into simple conclusions, but acknowledgement at least. A final meeting between God and wolf that recognized what had been between them and what could not be undone. The battle continued to rage around Tyr as he stood in thought. He saw Heimdall and Loki locked in mortal combat, each striking blows that would prove fatal to both. He saw Freya fall to Surtur's flaming sword, the god having fought bravely but lacking the weapon that might have made different. He saw countless warriors, divine and mortal, falling on all sides as the battle ground on toward its prophesied conclusion. Tyr returned to the fighting, joining a group of gods defending against a surge of fire giants. He moved among his allies, his sword flashing in his left hand, his missing right hand no longer a source of shame, but simply a part of who he was. He fought with skill earned through ages of existence, with courage that had never failed him, with honor that remained intact even as the world ended around him. The battle wore on for what seemed like ages, though time itself was becoming strange as the fundamental structures of reality began to break down. The sky above showed tears where the fabric between realms was coming apart. Yggdrasil's trembling had become violent shaking, the world tree threatening to fall and take all 9 realms down with it. The very ground beneath the fighters' feet was cracking, revealing abysses beneath. Through all of this, Tyr fought on. He did not seek a glorious death or a legendary final stand. He simply continued, doing what needed doing, protecting those who needed protection, fighting threats that needed fighting, maintaining his duty until the moment when duty could no longer be maintained. The end came gradually, and then all at once, as endings often do. Surta, having killed Freya and many other gods, raised his flaming sword high and brought it down upon the world. Fire spread from that sword stroke, consuming everything it touched. The flames burned brighter than any mortal fire, hot enough to melt stone, fierce enough to consume even divine flesh. The fire spread across the battlefield, across Asgard, across all the 9 realms. It burned through the roots of Yggdrasil, causing the great tree to finally collapse. As the tree fell, the realms that depended on it fell too, sliding into each other, breaking apart, dissolving into chaos. The carefully maintained order of creation was undone, returned to something closer to the primordial state before the gods had shaped it into structured reality. Tyr felt the heat approaching, saw the flames consuming everything in their path. He stood his ground, sword still raised, ready to face this final enemy, even though fire could not be fought with blade. Around him, other gods and warriors made their own last stands, some defiant, some accepting, all facing the inevitable with whatever courage they could muster. The flames reached Tyr, and he felt heat beyond anything he had experienced before. For a moment, there was pain, intense and all-consuming. Then there was light, so bright it transcended seeing. Then there was nothing at all, or perhaps everything, or perhaps something in between that mortal or divine consciousness could not properly process. The world burned. Everything burned. The palaces of Asgard crumbled and were consumed. The halls of Valhalla fell into ash. The fields where humans had struggled through Fimbulwinter were scoured clean. The oceans boiled away. The mountains melted. The 9 realms, which had existed in their configured forms for ages beyond counting, were unmade. But destruction, as profound as it was, proved not to be the final word. As the prophecies had suggested, after the fire came the flood. From sources unknown, perhaps from the tears between realms, perhaps from the essence of the dying world tree, water poured forth. It quenched the flames, cooled the burning lands, covered everything in cleansing flow. The flood waters rose until they covered all the ruins of the 9 realms. They washed away ash and debris, carried off the remnants of the old world, prepared the way for what would come next. For a long time, there was only water, vast and dark and empty, like the primordial seas that existed before creation. But life is persistent, and some things survive even ultimate destruction. Deep beneath the floodwaters, roots of Yggdrasil remained alive. The great tree had fallen, but it was not entirely dead. Those roots began to grow again, slowly, patiently, building toward a new trunk, new branches, a new world tree that would support a new configuration of reality. As the tree began its regrowth, the waters started to recede. Land emerged, clean and new, unmarked by the battles and conflicts of the old world. This new land was fresh, fertile, ready for life to begin again. The sun, which had been hidden during Ragnarok, emerged from behind the darkness. It was not the old sun, but a new one, daughter of the sun that had been consumed in the flames, continuing her mother's path across the sky. In this new world, survivors began to gather. Some gods had endured the destruction, protected by fate or fortune or their own natures. They came together in the new fields where Asgard had once stood, meeting on grass unmarked by divine palaces or golden halls. They were fewer than before, changed by what they had experienced, but alive and ready to build anew. Among these survivors was Tyr. The god of justice had passed through fire and flood and emerged on the other side. He stood in the new world, still missing his right hand, still carrying the marks of his choices and sacrifices. But he was alive, and with life came purpose, came duty, came the opportunity to continue his work of maintaining justice and order. Other survivors joined him. Modi and Magni, Thor's sons, arrived carrying their father's hammer, Mjolnir, which had survived the destruction. Baldur and Hod, who had been dead before Ragnarok, returned from the realm of death, released by the breaking and remaking of reality. Hönir, who had been a god since the earliest days, also survived. Together, this small group of deities looked at the new world and began to consider what should be done. They spoke of building again, but building differently this time. The old world had held flaws that contributed to its destruction. The new world should learn from those mistakes. There should be less emphasis on power and domination, more on harmony and balance. Justice should be central rather than peripheral, guiding principles rather than afterthought. Tyr found himself in a position he had never sought, but which seemed natural. The other gods looked to him for guidance on how to establish this new divine order. His reputation for fairness, his sacrifice for principle, his survival through ultimate destruction, all gave him authority that even the sons of mighty Thor acknowledged. In the new world, there were also human survivors. Two people, a man and a woman, named Lif and Lifthrasir, had hidden within Yggdrasil during the fire and flood. They emerged now into the new world, the first humans of the new age. From them would come all the future generations of humanity. People who would have no memory of the old world's conflicts and mistakes, who would have the opportunity to build better civilization. The gods approached these first humans with humility that had been lacking in the old world. They did not demand worship or obedience. Instead, they offered guidance, suggested principles, shared wisdom learned through painful experience. They told Lif and Lifthrasir about honor and justice, about the importance of keeping oaths, about maintaining balance between strength and compassion. Tyr spent much time with these new humans, teaching them about law and justice. He shared stories from the old world, not to glorify what had been but to illustrate what had gone wrong. He told them about Fenrir, about how fear had led to injustice, how injustice had festered until it helped destroy everything. He showed them his missing hand and explained what it represented, the price of maintaining principles even when difficult. Lif and Lifthrasir listened carefully to these lessons. They understood that they were being given an opportunity that was both precious and frightening. They would be the ancestors of all future humans in this new world. The choices they made, the values they established, the examples they set would echo through all their descendants. They took this responsibility seriously, asking many questions, seeking to understand deeply rather than simply memorizing rules. As time passed in the new world, patterns of life began to establish themselves. The survivors built simple dwellings, nothing like the golden halls of old Asgard. They planted crops and tended them, working the soil with their own hands. They gathered food from the new forests that were growing. They lived simply, focused on what mattered rather than on displays of wealth or power. Tyr found satisfaction in this simpler existence. He still served as a judge when disputes arose, still maintained laws and principles. But now his work felt more connected to daily life, less abstract and remote. When he made a judgment about how to share resources or resolve a conflict, he saw immediately how it affected the small community. The consequences of justice were immediate and visible, rather than distant and theoretical. The god continued to think often about the old world and his role in it. He thought about Fenrir, wondering what had become of the wolf after he walked away from their final meeting. Had Fenrir survived the fire and flood? Was he somewhere in this new world, running free in forests that had never known imprisonment? Or had he been consumed in the destruction, his purpose fulfilled with Odin's death? There was no way to know. But Tyr hoped that his old friend had found peace, whatever form that might take. He thought about his father Odin, about the Allfather's long reign and his ultimate fate. Odin had been wise and powerful, but also manipulative and willing to sacrifice others for his purposes. The new world would need different leadership, gods who served rather than ruled, who guided rather than commanded. Tyr committed himself to modeling this different approach. He thought about all the gods who had fallen during Ragnarok. Thor and his serpent enemy, both dead. Heimdall and Loki, destroying each other. Freya sacrificing himself against Surta. So many others whose names and deeds were part of the old world's history. Their loss created both sadness and opportunity. The new world would be shaped by those who survived, by the choices they made going forward, rather than by patterns established in the old age. As the new world continued to grow and develop, Tyr watched with cautious optimism. This reality was different from what had been before, and that difference offered hope that history need not repeat itself. But he also understood that every world, every age, every civilization carried within it the seeds of both greatness and destruction. The choice between these outcomes depended on thousands of individual decisions, on whether beings chose honor over convenience, justice over expedience, long-term wisdom over short-term gain. The God of justice resolved to continue his work for as long as this new world existed. He would teach and guide, judge and counsel, maintain the principles that gave structure and meaning to existence. He would carry his missing hand as a reminder of the cost of those principles, and as a symbol that some things were worth sacrifice. And he would remain vigilant, watching for signs that fear and injustice were again taking root, ready to oppose them before they could grow into forces that might require another ending and another beginning. Part 6. Reflections in the New World. The seasons turned in the New World, each one bringing changes and growth. The land that had emerged from the flood proved remarkably fertile, responding eagerly to cultivation. Forests spread across hillsides, their trees growing straight and strong. Rivers ran clear and clean, full of fish. The air itself seemed fresher, as if the fire and flood had purified it of corruption that had accumulated over the old world's long ages. Tyr walked often through this new landscape, observing how life was establishing itself. He saw deer in the forest, birds building nests, bees gathering pollen from wildflowers. The abundance reminded him that creation was ongoing, that endings enabled new beginnings, that destruction and generation were different aspects of the same cycle. During these walks, the god would sometimes stop at high places where he could see far across the land. From such vantages, he would look toward where Lyngvi had been in the old world. The dark lake and its grey island no longer existed, washed away in the flood. But in his mind, Tyr could still see that place, could still remember sitting beside Fenrir, could still feel the weight of what had happened there. The new humans, Life and Lifthrasir, and their growing children, developed their own culture in this fresh world. They established traditions that reflected the lessons the gods had taught them. When making important agreements, they would invoke Tyr's name, asking him to witness their oaths and remember their promises. When facing difficult decisions, they would ask themselves what honor required rather than what was easier. The children born to Lif and Lifthrasir were different from the humans of the old world in subtle ways. They seemed more naturally inclined toward cooperation and fairness. Perhaps growing up in a world free from the old conflicts, not inheriting traditions of warfare and revenge, allowed them to develop along gentler paths. Or perhaps the gods' close involvement in their early education shaped them beneficially. Whatever the cause, these new humans gave Tyr hope that better patterns could be established. As the years accumulated, the small community of survivors grew into a larger society. More dwellings were built, forming a modest village in the place where golden Asgard had once stood. The architecture was humble, wooden structures rather than divine palaces, but they were solid and comfortable. The people took pride in building things with their own hands, in being self-sufficient rather than depending on magic or divine intervention. Tyr participated in this community life in ways he never had in the old world. He helped build structures when extra hands were needed, remembering with wry humor that he now had only one hand to offer. He assisted with harvests, working in fields alongside humans and gods without distinction. He joined in evening gatherings around fires, listening to stories and songs, contributing his own tales when asked. This direct participation in daily life changed the god's perspective on justice and law. In the old world, his judgments had often dealt with abstract principles and conflicts between powerful beings. Now he addressed simpler matters: how to fairly divide harvest between families, how to handle situations where someone's cow damaged another's garden, how to maintain peace when neighbors disagreed about boundary lines. These simpler conflicts were no less important than the divine disputes of old. In fact, Tyr came to believe they were perhaps more fundamental. The fabric of any society was woven from countless small interactions, daily choices about how to treat others, routine decisions about fairness and responsibility. If these everyday matters were handled with justice, larger conflicts might never arise. The god also found himself serving as a teacher in more formal ways. The humans asked him to instruct their children in principles of law and honor. He would gather the young ones in a grove near the village and speak to them about duty, sacrifice, courage, and fairness. He illustrated his lessons with stories from the old world, carefully choosing tales that conveyed important principles without glorifying the violence and destructiveness that had characterized much of that age. The children listened with rapt attention, especially when Tyr spoke about Fenrir. They were fascinated by the story of the great wolf, of the friendship between god and beast, of the betrayal and its consequences. When they asked why Tyr had put his hand in Fenrir's mouth if he knew it would be bitten off, the god answered honestly. He explained that sometimes honor required accepting personal loss, that keeping one's word even at great cost was the foundation of trust, and that without trust, no society could function. One young girl, bolder than her peers, asked Tyr if he regretted his choice. The god considered the question carefully before answering. He told her that regret was complicated. He regretted the situation that had required such choice, regretted the fear that had led to Fenrir's binding, regretted that friendship had been sacrificed to necessity. But he did not regret keeping his oath, did not regret paying the price that honor demanded. If faced with the same choice again, he would act the same way, though he would wish desperately for circumstances that did not require such action. The children found this answer confusing, which perhaps was appropriate. Justice itself was often confusing, requiring difficult distinctions and uncomfortable compromises. Tyr told them that as they grew older, they would face choices where no option was purely good, where the best path still carried cost. In such situations, they should choose based on principles rather than convenience, should act with honor even when painful, should remember that integrity was worth sacrifice. As the new world continued its development, the survivors began to discover remnants of the old world that had somehow endured through fire and flood. Buried beneath soil or hidden in caves, they found artifacts that told stories of what had been before. Weapons carried by fallen warriors, broken pieces of divine architecture, fragments of the old Bifrost Bridge, scattered pieces of history preserved by chance or fate. These discoveries prompted conversations about how much of the old world should be remembered and honored versus how much should be left behind. Some survivors, particularly Modi and Magni, wanted to preserve everything, to maintain connections to the mighty age of Thor and Odin. Others argued for focusing entirely on the future, for building something completely new without being constrained by the past. Tyr advocated for a middle path, as he so often did. He believed the old world offered valuable lessons, both positive and negative. To forget it entirely would mean potentially repeating its mistakes. But to try to recreate it would mean missing the opportunity this new beginning offered. The artifacts should be preserved, he suggested, but as teaching tools and reminders, rather than as objects of worship or as templates to copy. This approach was accepted by most of the survivors. They created a simple structure where artifacts could be stored and displayed. It was not a grand museum or temple, just a modest building where people could come to see physical evidence of the old world and hear stories about what those objects represented. Tyr often served as guide in this place, explaining the context of various items, sharing the histories they embody. Among the artifacts was a piece of Gleipnir, found tangled in the roots of the new Yggdrasil. The dwarf-made ribbon had survived the destruction, though it was now broken and inert, its magic dissipated. Tyr kept this fragment in a place of prominence, for it represented perhaps the most important lesson of the old world, that power without justice, security without honor, order maintained through injustice, all carried seeds of eventual destruction. When people asked about the ribbon, Tyr would tell Fenrir's story in full. He did not hide the parts that reflected poorly on the gods, did not excuse or justify the betrayal. He presented the situation honestly, explaining the fear that motivated the binding, the prophecies that drove decisions, the terrible choice he had faced. He wanted people to understand that even beings of power and wisdom could act wrongly when motivated by fear. He also spoke about Fenrir himself, not as a monster, but as an intelligent being who had been treated unjustly. The wolf had responded to kindness with loyalty, to betrayal with appropriate punishment, to their final meeting with mercy. Tyr wanted people to remember that even creatures they might fear could possess nobility, that perceived enemies might have legitimate grievances, that violence often stemmed from earlier injustice rather than from inherent evil. These stories affected the New World's development in subtle but important ways. The humans who heard them grew cautious about acting from fear, understanding that fear-driven decisions often created problems worse than those they tried to prevent. They became more careful about making judgments based on what someone might do, rather than on what they had actually done. They developed strong traditions around keeping oaths and maintaining honor even at personal cost. As the human population grew, spreading beyond the initial village to establish new settlements, they carried these values with them. Tyr's teachings became foundational principles for the emerging civilization. Every community had its oath stones where promises could be made under proper witness. Every settlement had councils that tried to resolve disputes through fair judgment, rather than through dominance of the strong over the weak. The god watched this cultural development with satisfaction mixed with caution. He was pleased to see justice valued, honored, maintained as a core principle. But he also understood that every generation needed to choose these values for themselves. They could not be imposed or inherited passively. Each person, each community, each age had to decide whether fairness mattered more than advantage, whether honor was worth its cost, whether justice deserved sacrifice. Tyr continued his work of teaching and judging through many seasons. The simple community grew into a thriving society, but it remained smaller and less ostentatious than the old world civilizations had been. There were no great armies, no grand conquests, no empires built on subjugation. Instead, there were networks of cooperation, councils of equals, agreements maintained because honor required it, rather than because power enforced it. The god found this new pattern satisfying in ways the old world never had been. In Asgard's golden halls, justice had often been a secondary concern, invoked when convenient but set aside when it conflicted with power or desire. Here, in the simpler world, fairness was foundational. Not because people were inherently better than the gods of old had been, but because they had inherited cultural patterns that valued it, and because those patterns were reinforced through constant practice and teaching. As time passed, Tyr noticed that his own nature was evolving. The one-handed god of justice remained who he had always been in fundamental ways. He still valued honor, still made fair judgments, still believed in the importance of maintaining principles even at personal cost. But he had become gentler, more patient, less rigid in his thinking. The old world had required a kind of sternness from him, an unwavering commitment to law and order that sometimes felt harsh even to himself. The new world allowed more flexibility. When someone made a mistake or broke a rule, there was room to consider context, to understand circumstances, to balance justice with mercy. Tyr found himself incorporating compassion into his judgments in ways that would have seemed impossible in the old age. This evolution was partly a response to the different environment. The new world's smaller scale and simpler structures meant that everyone knew everyone else, that conflicts were between neighbors rather than strangers, that consequences of decisions affected people he personally knew. It was harder to be abstractly stern when the person receiving judgment was someone whose children you had taught, whose home you had helped build, whose companionship you had shared around evening fires. But the evolution also reflected lessons learned through the experience of Ragnarok and its aftermath. Tyr had seen what rigid adherence to fear and power had created. He had witnessed the destruction that came when justice was subordinated to security, when principles were sacrificed to expediency. He had learned that sometimes the most just action was also the kindest, that mercy and fairness were not opposites but partners. The god's relationship with the other divine survivors also evolved during these years. In the old world, despite his respect and importance, Tyr had been somewhat isolated. His commitment to justice made him different, created distance between him and gods who valued other qualities more highly. In the New World, these differences mattered less. Modi and Magni, Thor's sons, came to appreciate Tyr's wisdom in ways they might not have when their father lived. They consulted him regularly on matters of governance and law, valuing his judgment even when it conflicted with their initial instinct. Baldur, returned from death, found in Tyr a kindred spirit, someone else who valued goodness and honor. They spent many evenings in conversation, discussing philosophy and ethics, exploring questions about the nature of justice and virtue. Even Hania, who had survived from the earliest days and who had always been somewhat mysterious in his purposes, developed a closer relationship with Tyr in the new world. The two ancient gods would walk together sometimes, sharing observations about how this new age was unfolding, comparing it to the old world they both remembered. Hania's perspective, shaped by experiences even older than Tyr's, provided context and wisdom that the god of justice valued. These relationships, and the community they created, helped Tyr heal from wounds that were not physical. The guilt he had carried about Fenrir, the weight of choices made during the old world, the burden of witnessing so much destruction, all these gradually became lighter. He could not forget, nor did he want to, but he could integrate these experiences into a larger understanding, could see them as part of a longer story that was still being written. The new world was not perfect. Even with the best intentions and the finest teachings, conflicts arose. People made mistakes, acted selfishly, allowed fear or anger to override wisdom. Tyr found himself settling disputes that echoed old patterns, seeing familiar human failings expressed in new context. But now these problems were addressed early, resolved before they could fester into greater conflicts, handled with principles that prevented small injustices from growing into systemic ones. One particular incident tested the new world's commitment to justice in a way that reminded Tyr of old challenges. A young man was accused of stealing food from common stores during winter. The evidence against him was strong. Many witnesses had seen him near the stores at unusual times. Food had disappeared on nights when he had been seen there. Under the laws the community had established, theft from common stores was a serious offense, for it threatened everyone's survival. The young man admitted taking the food, but claimed justification. His family was struggling, he said. His mother was ill, his younger siblings hungry. He had asked for additional rations, but had been denied because his family had already received their fair share. In desperation, he had taken what he felt his family needed to survive. The community brought this case to Tyr, asking for his judgment. On one side stood the law, clearly broken, and the principle that common resources must be protected. On the other stood a desperate son trying to care for his family, driven by love and fear rather than by greed or malice. The situation had no easy resolution, no answer that satisfied all principles at once. Tyr listened to all aspects of the case carefully. He spoke with the young man, with his family, with community leaders, with those who managed the common stores. He investigated why the family's request for additional rations had been denied, whether that decision had been fair, whether the processes for requesting help were adequate. He examined not just the immediate question of the young man's guilt, but the broader context in which his actions had occurred. After thorough investigation, Tyr delivered a complex judgment. The young man had indeed broken the law by stealing from common store. That fact could not be dismissed or excused entirely, for laws existed to protect everyone and had to be maintained. However, the circumstances significantly mitigated his offense. He'd acted from necessity rather than greed, had tried legitimate channels first, had taken only what his family needed rather than hoarding excess. Therefore, Tyr ruled, the young man would face consequences for his theft, but relatively light ones. He would work additional hours helping maintain the common stores, ensuring their security and organization. This work would serve as both punishment and restitution, allowing him to repay the community while learning the importance of protecting common resources. But Tyr also ruled that the community bore responsibility for the situation. The processes for requesting additional help had proven inadequate. A family had faced genuine need, and the system had failed to address it appropriately. The community needed to establish better ways to identify and assist those facing hardship, to ensure that desperation never pushed people toward death. Both sides of this judgment met with acceptance. The young man acknowledged his wrongdoing and willingly performed his assigned work. The community recognized the systemic failure Tyr had identified and worked to create better support systems. The resolution addressed immediate justice while also improving structures to prevent similar situations in the future. This case exemplified Tyr's evolved approach to justice. He maintained law and principle, refused to excuse violations simply because circumstances made them understandable. But he also looked beyond individual blame to examine systemic issues, to consider how communities could be structured to reduce injustice, rather than simply punishing it after the fact. Justice was not just about consequences, but about creating conditions where people could live honorably without being forced into desperate choices. As seasons continued their cycle and years accumulated, the new world developed characteristics that distinguished it clearly from what had come before. It was a world where power served justice, rather than justice serving power. Where strength was used to protect, rather than to dominate. Where wisdom was shared rather than hoarded. Where the lessons of the old world's destruction had been learned and applied. Tyr knew this better world would not last forever in its current form. All things changed. All ages ended. All civilizations eventually transformed or fell. But while it lasted, while these generations maintained the principles they had inherited and chosen, the new world offered something precious. It offered proof that beings could learn from mistakes, that destruction could lead to wisdom, that endings could generate beginnings that were better than what came before. The God of justice found peace in this knowledge. His missing hand remained a constant reminder of the old world's failures and the price he had paid for honor. But it was also a reminder that sacrifice for principle was meaningful, that individual choices mattered, that even in the face of overwhelming forces like fate and prophecy, beings could act with integrity and accept the consequences. On clear nights, Tyr would sometimes stand outside and look up at the stars. They were the same stars that had shone above the old world, following the same patterns, marking the same eternal path. But somehow they seemed brighter now, their light cleaner, as if they too had been purified by the fire and flood that had renewed creation. Beneath those stars, in a world still young and still learning, the one-handed God of justice continued his work. He taught and judged, counseled and protected, maintained and refined the principles that gave structure and meaning to existence. He remembered what had been, attended to what was, and prepared for what would come. And in all of this, he remained true to his nature, the quality that defined him more surely than his missing hand or his divine power. He remained just. Hush Hush, Part 7. Many generations passed in the New World. The children Tyr had taught grew old, and had children of their own, who in turn had children. The simple village expanded into a network of communities spread across the renewed land. The humans who populated this world knew the old stories only as tales told by their elders, ancient history that shaped their values, but felt distant from their daily lives. Tyr himself remained unchanged physically, for gods did not age as mortals did. But he changed in other ways, growing in wisdom and understanding through accumulated experience. He had now lived through two worlds, had witnessed both destruction and renewal, had seen patterns repeat and evolve. This deep perspective made him a living repository of knowledge, someone who could provide context that spanned ages. The god spent increasing time in reflection during these later years of the new world. He would walk alone through forests, following streams to their sources, climbing hills to watch sunset. During these solitary times, he contemplated the great questions that had occupied his thoughts throughout his existence. What was the nature of justice? How should beings balance freedom and order? When was sacrifice necessary, and when was it merely waste? What lessons from the past should be preserved, and which should be left behind? These questions had no final answers. Tyr understood. Each generation, each individual, had to grapple with them anew. But his contemplation helped him refine his own understanding, develop better ways of explaining these concepts to those who sought his counsel. Wisdom was not about having all answers, but about developing better questions, deeper frameworks for thinking about challenges. During one of these solitary walks, Tyr came upon a place in the forest that reminded him powerfully of Lingi. It was an island in a small lake, rocky and bare, isolated from the surrounding land. The resemblance was not exact, for this lake was smaller, and its waters clear rather than dark. But something about the configuration triggered memory so strong it was almost physical. The god stood at the water's edge for a long time, looking at the island, remembering. He thought about Fenrir as he had been in youth, playful and loyal, responding to kindness with affection. He thought about the wolf's transformation through betrayal and imprisonment, intelligence giving way to rage, friendship replaced by justified resentment. He thought about their final meeting on the battlefield of Ragnarok, that moment when vengeance could have been completed but was instead set aside. Where was Fenrir now? The question surfaced in Tyr's mind as it had countless times before. Had the great wolf survived the fire and flood? Was he somewhere in this new world, perhaps in wild places far from human settlement? Or had his purpose been fulfilled with Odin's death, his role in the cosmic drama completed, his existence ended in the general destruction? Tyr realized he would probably never know the answer. But standing by this small lake, looking at this island that echoed Lyngvi, he found himself hoping that Fenrir had survived, that somewhere the wolf ran free, unbound, and at peace. After everything, despite everything, his old friend deserved that freedom. The god reached down and picked up a stone from the lakeshore. He held it in his left hand, feeling its weight and solidity. Then, in a gesture that felt both spontaneous and ceremonial, he threw the stone toward the island. It arced through the air and splashed into the water halfway to its target. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles, disturbing the lake's calm surface temporarily before smoothness returned. It was a small gesture, meaningless to any observer. But to Tyr, it felt like completion of something. A farewell or acknowledgement or blessing sent across time and circumstance to a being who had shaped him as surely as he had shaped event. He stood watching the ripples fade, then turned and walked back through the forest toward the community that awaited his return. As Tyr aged in spirit and wisdom, he began to prepare for his own eventual ending. Gods could die, as Ragnarok had proven. Though he had survived that destruction, nothing guaranteed he would survive whatever came next. Eventually, through violence, or fading, or transformation, his existence in its current form would end. The question was not whether, but when, and more importantly, what he would leave behind. The god began to work more deliberately on preserving his understanding of justice in forms that could outlast him. He spoke at length with Forseti, the younger god of justice and reconciliation, sharing everything he had learned about fair judgment and principled decision-making. He trained human judges, establishing traditions and practices that could continue after his direct involvement ended. Most importantly, Tyr began to write. It was slow work for someone with only one hand, but he persisted. He created texts that explained principles of justice, not as rigid rules but as frameworks for thinking about fairness. He wrote case studies, drawn from his long experience, showing how principles applied in specific situations, demonstrating the complexity of real judgment compared to abstract ideal. These writings were not grand philosophical treatises of the sort that scholars in the old world might have produced. They were practical, grounded in real situations, designed to help people make better decisions rather than to impress with theoretical sophistication. Tyr wrote in simple language, using examples from ordinary life, making his wisdom accessible to anyone willing to think carefully. As he worked on these texts, Tyr found himself returning again and again to the story of Fenrir. It appeared in his writings more than any other example, examined from multiple angles, used to illustrate different principles. The binding of the wolf demonstrated how fear could override justice. The sacrifice of Tyr's hand showed the price of maintaining honor. Their final meeting exemplified mercy and the possibility of transcending revenge. Through these repeated examinations, Tyr came to understand that his relationship with Fenrir had been the defining experience of his existence. Everything else in his long life, all his other judgments and actions and teachings, somehow related to or reflected that central story. It had taught him more about justice than centuries of study and practice in less complex situations. The humans who read Tyr's writings as he completed them were moved by his honesty. He did not present himself as a perfect exemplar of justice, but as someone who had struggled with difficult choices, who had made decisions with lasting consequences, who carried both pride and regret about his action. This honesty made his teachings more powerful, for readers could see that justice was not about perfection, but about striving to do right despite complexity and uncertainty. One young woman, reading Tyr's account of Fenrir's binding, asked him a question that cut to the heart of his ongoing internal conflict. She wanted to know if he believed the binding had been just. Not necessary, not practical, Not understandable given the circumstances, but actually just. Did imprisoning someone for crimes they had not yet committed align with the principles of fairness he had devoted his existence to upholding? Tyr sat in silence for a long time before answering. The young woman waited patiently, understanding that she had asked something profound. Finally, the god spoke, choosing his words with care. He told her that by the principles of justice he held most fundamental, the binding had not been just. Fenrir had committed no crime. Imprisoning him violated the basic principle that punishment should address actual wrongdoing rather than potential future actions. But, Tyr continued, justice was not the only value that mattered. There was also protection of the innocent, preservation of order, prevention of harm. Sometimes these values conflicted with pure justice, created situations where no choice was entirely right. In such situations, decisions had to be made anyway, and the decision-maker had to accept responsibility for choosing one imperfect option over other. He had chosen to enable Fenrir's binding because he believed preventing potential catastrophe outweighed the injustice to one individual. It was a utilitarian calculation, a weighing of harms, a choice of lesser evil over greater. But he did not claim this choice was just. It was necessary, or so he had believed at the time. Necessity and justice were not always the same thing. The young woman considered this answer. She asked then if necessity made the choice right, even if it was not just. Again, Tyr took time before responding. He told her that he could not say whether his choice had been right. He could only say that he had made it according to his best understanding at the time, accepting the consequences, living with the outcome. Rightness might be something that could only be judged with perfect knowledge and perfect wisdom, neither of which any being possessed. What he could say with certainty was that the choice had been his, made freely, and that he took full responsibility for it. He did not hide behind claims that he was only following orders or that others forced his hand. He had placed his hand in Fenrir's mouth willingly, understanding the price. The missing hand was his burden to bear, a physical reminder of moral complexity he carried with him always. This conversation, and others like it, showed Tyr that his legacy would not be a set of clear answers, but rather a way of thinking about difficult questions. He was teaching people not what to decide, but how to decide. Not providing solutions, but developing judgment. This felt appropriate for a god of justice. Law was about rules, but justice was about wisdom. Rules could be written down and followed mechanically. Wisdom required thought, consideration, engagement with complexity. As more time passed, Tyr began to notice changes in himself that suggested his existence in its current form was approaching its end. He felt himself becoming less solid, more ephemeral. When he looked at his remaining hand, he could sometimes see through it slightly, as if he were becoming transparent. This did not frighten him. It felt natural, an appropriate transition after such a long existence. The other gods noticed these changes too. They gathered around Tyr more frequently, seeking his company while he remained fully present. There was no fear or sadness in these gatherings, for all of them understood that endings were part of the natural cycle. They had witnessed the end of the old world, and the beginning of this new one. They understood that Tyr's ending would be another transition, another transformation in the ongoing flow of existence. During one of these gatherings, Modi asked Tyr what he wanted to be remembered for. It was not a casual question, but a genuine inquiry about legacy, about what mattered most from a life that had spanned ages. The god of justice considered carefully before answering. He said he wanted to be remembered for trying, not for always succeeding, not for being perfect, not for having all answers, but for consistently trying to act with honor, to make fair judgments, to maintain principles, even when difficult. He wanted people to remember that justice required effort, that it did not come naturally or easily, that maintaining it demanded constant attention and frequent sacrifice. And he wanted people to remember that even those who devoted themselves to justice could make mistakes, could face choices where all options were flawed, could carry regret alongside accomplishment. This was important, he said, because it meant justice was accessible to everyone. It was not some elevated state that only special beings could achieve. It was a practice, a commitment, a choice that anyone could make regardless of their nature or circumstances. Baldur, listening to this, added that Tyr should be remembered for his honesty. The god of justice never pretended moral clarity when he felt uncertainty. He never claimed certainty about rightness when he had doubt. This honesty made his judgments more trustworthy, for people knew he spoke truth as he understood it, rather than convenient justifications for predetermined positions. The conversation continued through the evening, with various gods and humans sharing what they had learned from Tyr, how his example had shaped them, what his presence had meant to their lives and their world. The god of justice listened to these testimonials with quiet appreciation, moved by the evidence that his efforts had mattered, that his work would continue through those he had influenced. As the gathering finally dispersed late into the night, Tyr remained sitting by the fire. The flames cast flickering light across his face, creating patterns of shadow and illumination. His missing right hand was a shadow against the fire's glow, a permanent reminder visible even in darkness. He stared into the flames and thought about everything that had led to this moment. He thought about the young god he had been in the golden halls of Asgard, idealistic and certain, believing that justice was straightforward and that right action could be clearly discerned. He thought about the god who had befriended Fenrir, who had seen in the wolf something worthy of kindness and trust. He thought about the god who had walked to Lyngvi, who had placed his hand in his friend's mouth, who had paid the price for maintaining order through injustice. He thought about the god who had fought at Ragnarok, who had witnessed the end of everything he had known, who had passed through fire and flood to emerge in a new world. And he thought about the god he was now, older in wisdom, if not in body, carrying understanding earned through experience, preparing to pass on what he had learned before his own ending came. All of these were him, different facets of a single being who had tried throughout a very long existence to understand and practice justice. He had not always succeeded. He had made choices he regretted, had acted from imperfect understanding, had sometimes prioritized other values over pure fairness. But he had tried, consistently and honestly, to do what seemed right according to the best principles he could discern. As dawn approached and the fire burned down to embers, Tyr stood and walked once more through the quiet community. He passed homes where families slept, fields ready for planting, workshops where people practiced their craft. All of this was built on foundations he had helped establish, guided by principles he had taught and modeled. It would continue after he was gone, would evolve and change, would face new challenges and develop new responses. But the basic framework would remain. Fairness mattered, honor required sacrifice. Justice was worth pursuing even when difficult. These were not just abstract ideals, but practical necessities for any society that hoped to endure with its humanity. They were Tyr's gift to this new world, his legacy more lasting than any golden hall or mighty deed. The sun rose over the renewed lands, bringing light to the new day. Tyr stood watching it, his one hand raised in greeting or farewell, his truncated right arm a silent testament to choices made and prices paid. The god of justice, the keeper of oaths, the being who had tried through two worlds to maintain honor in the face of chaos, stood ready for whatever came next. His story was not ending but transitioning, moving from one phase to another, continuing in different forms. He would live on in the principles he had taught, in the judgments he had made, in the example he had set. And somewhere, perhaps, in the memory of a great wolf who had once been his friend, who had taken his hand as justice required, who had shown mercy when vengeance would have been equally just. The new day stretched ahead, full of possibility and challenge, requiring wisdom and courage from those who would face it. Tyr smiled, watching the light spread across the world, and knew that he had done his part. Whatever came next, whether for him or for the world, would unfold according to patterns both chosen and fated, woven by countless decisions made by countless beings, each adding their thread to the great tapestry of existence. And in that tapestry, his thread was clear and strong, marked by a missing hand and an unwavering commitment to justice, running through the old world and the new, connecting past to present to future. A reminder that honor mattered, that sacrifice had meaning, that trying to do right was worth the cost even when certainty was impossible, and outcomes were uncertain. This was the story of Tyr, god of justice, keeper of oaths, the one who paid with his hand for principles he held dear. It was a story of complexity and contradiction, of difficult choices and lasting consequences, of friendship betrayed and honor maintained. It was a story that ended not with simple victory or clear resolution, but with ongoing commitment to values that transcended individual triumph or defeat. And it was a story that would be told and retold through all the ages of the New World, teaching generations yet unborn about courage and sacrifice, about the cost of justice and the necessity of honor, about how even God struggled with difficult choices and lived with their consequences. It was a story that mattered, that carried wisdom earned through painful experience, that offered guidance without claiming certainty. It was, in the end, a true story of justice.